playing against Butler. Got downhill. Couldn't punch it. Bam says, get it out of here. Adebayo, sky high with the block and rejection. That's why he's NBA All-Defensive Team. To Caldwell Pope inside. He's tied up by Green. Throws it back up top. James puts up the three. Oh, it's gone. LeBron James from downtown as the shot clock expires.
Gets it into Durant. Here is Durant moving on Tucker. He turns. He shoots.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the athleteshub.org presentation of our trade deadline podcast. It is the trade deadline occurs at 3 p.m. Eastern time today, and we've got a ton of trades already. So we should probably get right into it. My name's Gary. This is Devin, as always. We'll be joined by Isaiah a little bit later, talk about the Knicks and what they do or don't do. But let's be honest with ourselves. We're all here for one reason. We're going to talk about James Harden and Ben Simmons getting swapped for each other. I had a ton of stuff lined up for today. And then about 30 minutes before we rolled onto this thing, we had a huge trade. And we're going to go through it right now just to see what the trade all entails. I've got it lined up right here. Let me see. There's so many tweets right now. Everybody's going crazy. We got Josh Richardson being dealt. We got all this stuff going on. But for the Brooklyn Nets and the Philadelphia 76ers, the obvious thing we have is the trade of James Harden and Ben Simmons. But included in that deal for the Brooklyn Nets will be acquiring Seth Curry and Andre Drummond, as well as 2 first-round picks for James Harden. For the 76ers, they get back Harden and Paul Millsap. And although those are some good pieces for that trade, of course, Seth Curry being probably the best shooter on the Nets now, sans Kevin Durant. Andre Drummond, a big that they obviously needed. 2 first-round picks going that way. But really, Devin, what do you see here? We got James Harden, now a Philadelphia 76er. Crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. So me and you, Gary, have been collaborating on this great piece over on the athleteshub.org that everybody's going to have to go and check out. We've been updating it with not only official trades, but also reports and the rumors that we believe to be true. And I remember, Gary, telling you this morning, just leave the James Harden stuff alone because I trusted Woj. I trusted that he said that the talks weren't serious, but then again, apparently that they talked this morning. It sounds like, James Harden did want out of there. Everyone has to apologize to Brian Windhorst right now because he was the one saying James Harden was kicking and screaming to get out of there. A lot of backlash, I feel like, is going to come back on James Harden. I know there was a report out there that he was worried that by publicly requesting a trade, he was going to receive some backlash over the number of times he's requested to get out of his respective home area. And now I just told you, Gary, a few minutes before we went live, James Harden opts into his player option for next season. So he's already committed to his group. He hasn't even met the guys. He hasn't even played a single game with them on the floor, but he's already opting into that player option for next season, which is interesting.
I really like the trade with the 76ers. Of course, I think they might have given up a lot for James Harden, but especially if you can have him commit to another season, it makes it a little bit better of a trade, and instead of just having him rented out for 1 year like the Raptors did with Kawhi Leonard, possibly leaving after the summer. Of course, that was in the offseason before the year, so they had an entire season with him. But interesting to me is the fact that we got through about, 6 months of this happening where Ben Simmons was about to, I'm not leaving, I'm leaving, I'm not going anywhere that's not going to play me or what I want to do, which is basically I don't want to play into the 76ers. I don't want to play for Philly. Trade me literally anywhere else. I'm not going to play unless you do. And we all thought like, oh, he's going to tank his value. He's not going to have any sort of respect around the league anymore because of the temper tantrums that people were saying he was throwing. Now, a lot of that had to do with the mental illness thing that he was going through, which I 100% respect him for opening up about. although a little bit seemed to be in a way that made him kind of, you have that friend who's like, oh, I'm just not feeling it right now. And then you're like, okay, that I understand. And then you see them go out with some other people and you're like, what are you doing right now? I thought everything was too bad and you were sad at your house, but really it worked. Ben Simmons is no longer a 76er, and the Daryl Morey reigns champion, knowing what he was doing, holding out until he could get the right deal.
It's interesting too. So that player option is going to be worth $47.3 million next season. The Brooklyn Nets also people are going to overlook this because of the big names such as Ben Simmons and James Harden. I actually love the addition of Andre Drummond, who is playing behind Joel Embiid, but the man is still a rebounding machine. And one of the weakest points of the Brooklyn Nets coming into the season was their lack of size. All you really had was a big three, and then after that, your next best player was probably going to be Patty Mills or Joe Harris, a couple of guards, but your best big man was probably Blake Griffin at one point in time. So adding someone with the likes of Andre Drummond, I think, is huge for them. Let me throw this question at you, Gary, because Isaiah mentioned this before. This trade now, James Harden over to the Philadelphia 76ers, does that make Philly the favorite for this season over in the East, you think, or you think it's going to take some time?
I honestly, with any team, you have to consider chemistry. Although it does look favorable for the 76ers, James Harden is a phenomenal passer, great playmaker. He's never, other than Dwight Howard, if I'm mistaken, he's never really had a great big man on his team. He ran in OKC with Kendrick Perkins. So, you're looking at a guy who's finally getting somebody on his roster who you can dump to in the post and actually score the ball. With Joel Embiid, for him at least, you get a guy on the perimeter that is going to be a very ball dominant guard. James Harden always, at some point in the last 5 years, decided I'm going to lead the league in usage, which he has multiple times. At least it's basically either him or Luka. And I'm interested to see how it works without Seth Curry. He was really one of their best offensive options other than Joel Embiid. Losing him, you're pretty much starting a lineup of James Harden, Tyrese Maxey, Danny Green, Tobias Harris, and Joel Embiid, which sounds freaking phenomenal on paper. But without the chemistry, we have no idea. We've never seen these players play on the court together. I do think their chances are a lot better than they were at the beginning of the season, pretty much because they actually have someone playing. Ben wasn't playing at all. So you actually have a guy that's on the court for this team, which, they haven't had. So good for them. I think they've got a much better chance of winning the title this year. And I think the same goes for the Nets, which is really strange. I don't think we've seen a trade this season where you look at both sides and go, yeah, that makes sense. They both got better. And I really do think with the addition of Ben Simmons on this team that needs a guy who can play some defense, you get Andre Drummond, who's going to take those LaMarcus Aldridge center minutes that they so desperately need, somebody that's at least big enough to guard the rim, get rebounds, play some good defense. Although Drummond does slack on some aspect of defense, when you've got guys like Kevin Durant and Ben Simmons around him, two really lanky defenders, and I think we don't give enough credit to KD for his defensive improvements once he left OKC, going to Golden State, taking it a little more seriously. I think this team went from a possible second round Western or Eastern Conference Finals team when everyone was healthy. They had a chance at the title, but that wasn't really seen. You have Kyrie Irving missing the games that he does. If they play home series, are they even going to have him on the court? To a guy within Kevin Durant who can look to his left and say, that's a guy in Ben Simmons that I can give the ball to, who might not be looking to score, which is probably what Durant needs. He's the best player in the Eastern Conference minus Giannis. And to have somebody that's going to be able to get him the ball, and to somebody that's going to be able to defend on the perimeter like Ben Simmons, and somebody who's going to be able to get the rebounds, Kevin Durant can focus more on that style of basketball that he's good at, isolation, mid-range, one-on-one, but also be able to feed off of those two guys. And also Andre Drummond, underrated passer. Another thing I'd like to say. But do you feel like at any point we are going to look back in the next 6 months and think, wow, that was a terrible mistake by both teams? Or is it just one? Or do you think even team would regret this maybe a little bit later on because of the contracts, because of the new fits, and maybe this chemistry. It takes a little bit too long to gel, and they have to, rely on some things that they weren't really expecting to.
Yeah, so here's my thing, right? Is I my viewpoint is similar to yours when it comes to both sides improving, right? So I think Ben Simmons is a better fit on the Brooklyn Nets than James Harden is. And I also think James Harden on the 76ers is going to end up being a better fit than Ben Simmons could have ever been. Ben Simmons isn't necessarily a shooter. Therefore, the 76ers game plan was work around the outside with Seth Curry and a couple of the other guys, but you're primarily working on Ben Simmons driving to the basket, and you're working on Joel Embiid on the inside, and you're primarily focusing on your defense. The addition of James Harden, you add that element, the one-on-one aspect. James Harden just brings something else to the game that Ben Simmons just doesn't, and it's apples and oranges, right? Because Ben Simmons is a lot better defensively than James Harden has ever been in his career. And
That's an understatement.
Yeah, and I love what both of these teams have done. Obviously, James Harden is the best player overall in this trade package on either side. But when you're looking at it, Brooklyn got more than enough in return for James Harden. The draft compensation, the ability to rebound when it comes to Andre Drummond. And you're also talking about someone who's a very, very good shooter in Seth Curry. So you're still getting 3-point shots off, and you're getting a lot of role players. And we saw it just the other day. The Boston Celtics and the Brooklyn Nets were playing, and I watched it, and it was ridiculous. They were down 28-2 at one point in the first quarter to the Boston Celtics, and you could just tell, when Blake Griffin is your best player out there and he's being forced to play over 30, 40 minutes a game, it's just not a good look. And two stats that I'm seeing right now on Twitter that I think you'll find amusing, Gary. One is the obvious stat of the number of games that James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving all played on the same floor. 16 games is the number of games.
Is that true?
16 games is how many games those three players have all been on the floor at the same time for. And The other one, which is a little bit more amusing than actually factual, but if you like betting on superstitions, Kevin Durant has always made the finals when playing with a member of the Curry family. Remember that, Gary.
Me and my buddy Nick have a 2K league that we have Seth Curry on, and I love Seth Curry. He is absolutely dominant from the perimeter. We always joke every time he makes a three that he's the better Curry brother, and it's all jokes. It's all, we're all kidding and stuff, but it does raise the fact that Seth Curry is really good, and I do not think that we're going to look back and think that this is just some filler to get the salaries. Like a lot of people thought that they were going to have a couple of players in this trade that might just be there for salary filler, especially on the 76ers end. I saw a lot of the end of the bench players getting thrown into this trade just to match the salaries, because at the beginning we didn't think that Seth Curry or Andre Drummond was even going to be included in these deals. A lot of people were suggesting it was just going to be like a Matisse Thybulle, maybe a Tyrese Maxey going back to the Brooklyn Nets. I don't know why Brooklyn would have taken those players just based on timelines. Seth Curry obviously fits their win now mode a lot better than like a Tyrese Maxey would, who in his own right is a great player. He's doing phenomenal this season, shooting great, filling in that gap that Ben Simmons left on the perimeter of the court. While if you were the Nets fan and you saw the trade and you were like, okay, we got Tyrese Maxey back, I don't know if you're as excited as you are now with getting Seth Curry and Andre Drummond. No. If anything, I would say the 76ers, considering how bad Harden has played these last couple weeks, and we saw this in Houston, is it actually him playing bad, or does he just not care? Which is a testament to his character, but we're not going to go into that. My point being more was, we might look back at this and think, did the Nets get a really good value for what they traded for James Harden, considering his level of enthusiasm playing? You get a guy like Seth Curry, you get Andre Drummond, you get James Harden, you get some future picks. To me, it just seems like they got even better than they would have if they just kept James Harden, because the pieces fit more. None of those three guys were willing to sacrifice what they needed to in order to win the games. We see it in Miami, represent with LeBron James, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade. They didn't win the first year because one of them had to take a step back. We saw that was Chris Bosh in the first year. And then in the second year, we had Dwayne Wade realize that this is LeBron's team. We need to give him the ball. He's the leader. Let's make him do what we need. And when you have James Harden, you have Kyrie Irving, and you have Kevin Durant, and you only give them 16 games to get good, they were never able to work that out. You watch them play, and you're like, this is an offensive juggernaut. But when the playoffs come, and people are complaining because one of them only got a certain amount of shots a game. And then you got to get Joe Harris the ball because he's an incredible three-point shooter. LaMarcus Aldridge wants to take a couple turnaround shots. At the same time, you look at it and go, maybe this is the best move for the Nets, leaving James Harden behind and sending him to the 76ers, getting a guy like Ben Simmons who's going to be able to pass the ball and is a lot more passive than James, just in a scoring sense. So I personally really like this trade for them. And I think Curry is a great addition just because the shooting, the gravity that he'll have getting basically open shots all day when you have James Harden, or when you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving basically needing both to be double teamed. There's no way I don't see Steph Curry possibly having even better season than he has this season in Philadelphia. Do you feel as if this is obviously going to be the biggest trade that we see today, unless, unless Russell Westbrook gets moved, or I'm not looking at something. Don't get me started. Or, we might have a whole, Isaiah comes on the podcast and is like, if Mitchell Robinson doesn't get moved, I love Isaiah. But that's just, I'm just putting in comparison to what we're talking about now. It'll be really funny. Shout out to Troy and Jack in the stream watching on Facebook. Hey guys. Hello.
So here are sort of some of my thoughts, Gary. And I think from what we were talking about before about both sides benefiting, I think we're on the right track because I'm looking at it right now on my screen that a team, it's an unknown team, but a team in the Eastern Conference came to Ramona Shelburne, infamous reporter, and had said for ESPN.com and had said, quote, I hope this Brooklyn-Philadelphia trade does not happen because both of these teams are going to be better than us now. So I think both of these teams have just catapulted themselves right at the top of contention. I know we were talking in past episodes about whether these teams are going to live up to expectations. And I think this is actually going to cause a domino effect, Gary, because I'm looking at it right now. And apparently last night, a reporter was Jonathan Fegan was gone to and had heard last night that 5 or 6 teams were waiting for a potential Simmons and Harden trade to happen. That way they could then take that trade and go make their own respective deals. So this trade had a lot of balance on other trades happening. I don't think this is going to be the last big trade that happens. I think we're going to see something in the next couple of hours. I don't know if it's going to be a Russell Westbrook. I don't know if it's going to be, a New York Knicks blockbuster. I don't know if the Indiana Pacers are going to move on from Miles Turner. I'm hearing that the Brooklyn Nets are interested in Miles Turner. Could you imagine that team with Miles Turner down low as well? I don't know if there would be anybody that could stop that team this year. It's a lack of chemistry over in Brooklyn right now. It's going to take a few weeks to ramp that up. But, man, on paper, that team is absolutely disgusting.
It's absurd to think that the possibility of Miles Turner, and essentially it'll be probably for a package that involves Nicholas Claxton, who in his own right is a good player, coming off the bench for the Nets, backup center for the backup center style of player, rim runner, going to get you a little bit of rim protection. And for the Pacers, I don't see a reason why they wouldn't, entertain that in a sense because of the way that they're trying to rebuild. They're getting younger. They've traded away Domantas Sabonis, which we'll get into later. But, you look at this and you think to yourself, okay, the Nets if they do end up getting a guy like Miles Turner, you have the ability to literally space the floor out, get all 4 out, 1 in with Miles Turner playing that 5 position, great shooter, put him on the perimeter, and get Ben Simmons the open lanes that he needs to get to the basket. We haven't seen him get those style of points unless Joel Embiid was out. And now Joel had a lot of things to say in the offseason about how he developed the jump shot essentially because of Ben Simmons and how he needed to play off of him in a way because Ben wasn't going to shoot. So now if you get Miles Turner on this same team, you have the ability to play the way that the modern NBA plays and not have to worry about, we have two big guys who can't really space the floor out that much when, at least as well as they could. Joel was actually a really good shooter, still is. And I would love to see, maybe not as a Heat fan, I want a chance at the title too. But at the same time, as a basketball fan, the ability to watch those 5 players potentially on the court together is just absolutely intriguing, inspiring, and would be a great playoff matchup for the Milwaukee Bucks if they were able to meet in that sense. Now they still have to get through James Harden, Joel Embiid, and which is another thing we can talk about is how the Bucks, who made a couple of deals today too, might have improved a little bit depending on who you ask, but the competition in the East has ramped up expeditiously, if I'm using that word correctly.
And Gary, I don't want to interrupt you, but we're gonna need like a red alert button every time that a trade happens because we have another trade in which the Eastern Conference, the Charlotte Hornets are getting Montrezl Harrell in exchange for Ish Smith and Vernon Carey. So Montrezl Harrell is on his way to play with LaMelo Ball and the Charlotte Hornets. What are your
love that
initial
deal.
thoughts on that?
Wizards trade now at the highest value, I guess, if Ish Smith and Vernon Carey are your highest kept value for Montrezl Harrell. Harrell, 6'7", can really play offense at a very high level. Defensively, he's got a little bit to live up to, but for the Hornets, who are in desperate need of a big man, they were rumored to be shopping around and trying to find Jakob Poeltl, who plays for the Spurs, center minutes, great defensive center. I like this move for the Hornets a lot. Montrezl Harrell is going to be able to give them the minutes they need at center that they haven't been able to get a incredible amount of value at this year. And for the Wizards, Ish Smith comes back home. I loved him when he was backing up John Wall, so that's fun for them. But at the same time, I really think that the Wizards essentially are probably just trying to move off of their bigger guys, which you see here again. Not that he's a huge trade piece, but the Wizards also trading Aaron Holiday to the Phoenix Suns. Another Holiday brother on the move this week. I believe his brother, I can't remember his name right now, was traded to the Kings. Justin Holiday. Yeah, he was traded to the Kings the other day. And it seems like the Wizards also get a second round pick in that deal for Montrezl Harrell. So good value for Charlotte. I like Montrezl Harrell on that team. And there's one thing LaMelo Ball needs is more people to pass to. And he just got another one.
Another aspect too about the Charlotte Hornets, below the league average when it comes to rebounding. I know they've been lacking on defense as well this season. The last couple of Hornets games that I've watched, it's a pain to watch them defend against the paint when your only big man is Mason Plumlee for the most part, alongside Miles Bridges. So I think it's a good trade for Charlotte, who's going to try to settle themselves into the playoff picture in the East. And obviously, like you just saw, trades going on with the Wizards, who have been very active in the last few minutes. I think this is a good deal for Washington as they sort of move into this rebuild where Bradley Beal is going to be undergoing season-ending surgery. I like the trade for both sides. Obviously, I think it's just beneficial in different ways.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, after what we saw today with Brooklyn and 76ers, people are just trying to build around the edges. Charlotte, not a most lucrative team when it comes to playoff success. And so anything for them, honestly, is great. They got LaMelo Ball, gonna get that playoff experience that he really needs. They're paying Gordon Hayward a lot of money. They need to show some success, and this is the right move towards bumping up their standings in the East towards the All-Star break, going to be able to sell their fans on a higher octane offense than they had beforehand. if you want to talk about some of the other trades that happened today, or a couple of days ago, actually, we could start with a big one that came through. I believe it was not yesterday, but the day before. CJ McCollum going to the Pelicans. Let me check here. We can check out the draft guide, or sorry, not the draft guide. Wow, I'm getting way ahead of ourselves. You can check out the trade deadline guide that we got going on at theathleteshub.org. Devin and me have been putting it together. And honestly, Devin, you've been doing a lot more than I have. I've just kind of helped you out towards the beginning of the day, just because of how much stuff was going on. We had a bunch of things going crazy. But for the Pelicans,
and don't downplay yourself either. I might have been doing a little bit more, but you got the biggest trade of them all with James Harden I was walking out of work.
It's funny you were walking out of work. I was walking out of my house to come over to the studio to start recording. And as I opened the front door, I got the notification. I think it was our Facebook group chat started dinging. I was looking at my phone, and all of a sudden, Isaiah, who shout out to him, just mentioned that the Brooklyn Nets pretty much solved all of their issues in one trade, which is, they did. That's true. But he was messaging on it. He goes, "They did it. It happened. Oh my God, I can't believe it." So yeah, I managed to grab that right at the end before I left. I got on the road. Don't text and drive. But going back to what we were talking about earlier with the Pelicans and the Portland Trailblazers. Trailblazers have traded CJ McCollum, Larry Nance Jr., and Tony Snell to the New Orleans Pelicans in exchange for Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Josh Hart, Didi Louzada, and Tomas Satoransky. Now, Nickeil Alexander-Walker actually was packaged in a trade 3-teamed to the Utah Jazz in exchange for Joe Ingles. And that for the Utah Jazz, it's essentially a salary giving the expiring contract to the Portland Trailblazers because he's hurt. He's not going to be playing for the rest of the season. But just to get that out of the way, there's that. But CJ McCollum, now a New Orleans Pelican, so along with Larry Nance Jr., who hasn't played much this season due to a little bit of injury problems. But they got another dynamic scoring wing to put next to Zion Williamson, Jonas Valanciunas, Brandon Ingram. I really like this trade for the Pelicans because they're not going to get those free agent guys that a lot of teams can get, especially the bigger markets. So you got to go out and make these kind of trades in order to get some sort of backcourt help, right? Yeah. So, yeah, I like this trade for the Pelicans. I understand what the Portland Trailblazers are doing, but, they're kind of doing a little bit of a rebuild around Dame. Do you see this going well for the Trailblazers, considering that Dame has expressed his interest on contending and actually playing some real basketball?
Yeah, so it sounds like even after all these trades have taken place, that the Portland Trailblazers are focused around building around Damian Lillard. But how many years have we been saying the same exact narrative where the Portland Trailblazers are going to build around Damian Lillard? This is a team that's been to the Western Conference Finals. Damian Lillard is one of the best point guards that the NBA has to offer overall. I was a little shocked that McCollum was moving on. This was a team that originally drafted McCollum. I believe it was back in the 2013-14 draft. The pieces surrounding it, I guess it makes sense because you're opening up the cap space in the upcoming offseason a little bit. I personally, it's tough because Damian Lillard, he only has so many years left before we start considering him past his prime. I don't know if Damian Lillard is necessarily enough alone to carry a team to the NBA Finals, especially when you're looking at the stacked Western Conference. It's going to take a really big offseason addition for the Portland Trailblazers to be considered serious contenders in the Western Conference, in my opinion. And this was a trade that pretty much tells you that we're throwing this season away. It's a wash for Damian Lillard and company, and we're going to focus on next season.
Yeah, Damian hasn't really played this season. He reported a couple of weeks back that he was doing a season-ending surgery, which is understandable. They weren't doing that great anyway, and Dame was having a pretty bad year, possibly his worst year of his career, all things considered. Of course, like his rookie year, you expect not to be like at a high level, but with Dame, you want to build around him in a way that's going to mitigate his weaknesses, which is defense and he's not the greatest playmaker. He's a good passer, but no one really thinks of Damian Lillard as a 10 assist a game guy. So with the Portland Trailblazers, the way that I look at this is essentially they need to nail every single move they make for the next 3 years. And that's even if they keep Lillard. With Anthony Simons, and I know they really love him over there, he's a good player, pretty promising athlete. But at the same time, you have to build around Damian Lillard until he's not on your team anymore, because you owe it to him for sticking with you guys as long as possible. You owe it to the fans. That's the fan favorite. He's the best player in their franchise's history. And if you don't get what you can get out of Damian Lillard the last couple of years of his career, a trade where you don't necessarily get back anybody that's going to make a distinct impact on this team could really hurt them in the future, which I want to transition into a Portland Trailblazers trade that happened as well. Norman Powell, a couple of days ago, was shipped to the Los Angeles Clippers along with Robert Covington to the Clippers for Eric Gordon. I'm doing this off the top of my head, forgive me. Eric Gordon, Justice Winslow, Keon Johnson, and a first-round pick, I think, as well. So that's another trade that the Portland Trailblazers show that they're just kind of offloading all their assets and kind of punting on the season, like you had mentioned earlier. I wonder for the Clippers, do you feel with the addition of Norman Powell that possibly next season with Kawhi and Paul George back, that's an incredible trio if you're going to score some points and play some defense in the Western Conference, especially for a team that, even with the injuries they've had this year, are an 8th seed in the West, better than your Lakers, I gotta say. And sorry, I had to do that. I apologize.
It's okay. Hey, listen, we've earned that.
We'll get to that. No, but for the Portland Trailblazers, this is them offloading talent, and for the Clippers, this is them acquiring that talent that's gonna vault them into a position in the NBA Finals, possibly next year, that they hope to make to, that they have the scoring wing depth that they can show, hey, we're right in it with all these other teams. We might be hurt this year, but we got a great coach. Ty Lue is a phenomenal defensive coach, phenomenal coach in general, able to get this team with a lot of injuries to the playoffs, not even a play-in, to the playoffs, or the 8th seed. Do you feel like this is the team that next season has just the right as anybody else to say, hey, I'm a contender?
Yeah, so I think, so there's 2 things I want to say right here.
Go for it.
One about the Los Angeles Clippers, and then I have to pivot over to the Los Angeles Lakers really quick, because the Lakers are inching towards a trade finally. So for the Los Angeles Clippers, I talked about this in one of the first episodes. We talked about before the season even started what teams we expected to surprise everybody. I said the Los Angeles Clippers before the Kawhi injury, before the Paul George, or it was during the Kawhi injury, but before the Paul George injury, before their whole entire depth was pretty much depleted out the wazoo. I do think that with Norman Powell there, this is a move for the Los Angeles Clippers in which they say, hey, it might not be this year, but next year. I do think that trio of players, along with the depth that they already provide, are very, very interesting. I think they're right there in the mix with the rest of the Western Conference teams. And it's interesting because the free agency isn't really deep this upcoming offseason. It's a lot of player options that I expect to get accepted or opted into, and it's a lot of restricted free agents. So the ability for teams to match those same offers, and players such as DeAndre Ayton, for example. Like, DeAndre Ayton isn't going anywhere aside from the Phoenix Suns next year, I feel like. Mm-hmm. So you can't expect for him to be out there on the open market for teams to go in and grab Bradley Beal, the same exact situation coming off of his injury. I don't expect for him to hit the open market. I expect him to opt into his player option. And then as we pivot, the Los Angeles Lakers, it's unknown what the details are right now, but it sounds like they're working on a trade for Terrence Ross. And the trades are going crazy because now we have another trade in the Western Conference.
I saw that too. The moment you started talking,
Porzingis is going to the Washington Wizards. Absolutely crazy. So Gary, give us your thoughts on both of those deals as I try to update this as fast as humanly possible.
Holy crap. I mean, first off, Spencer Dinwiddie is being traded to the Mavs in that same deal. So we got basically a Spencer Dinwiddie trade for Kristaps Porzingis, which if you told me happened a year ago, I would have told you you're a dummy. But it happened. It's right here. It's in my face. Shams Charania tweeting it out. For the Dallas Mavericks, they finally have decided that the Kristaps Porzingis circus is not what they want to be a part of, and we might be giving Isaiah an aneurysm about this because of his love affair with Kristaps Porzingis. But essentially, the Wizards get a guy to. I don't really know what they're doing here. Like Kristaps, good player, like injury history, you know, he's got a lot of those. He's got a lot of injuries in his injury history. Jeez, I'm so excited I can't talk. But for the Dallas Mavericks, I love this deal for them, just considering that you get a guy who can take the ball away from Luka's hands so he doesn't have to do everything. You had Jalen Brunson doing it. And I love Jalen Brunson, good player. That's my analysis on every person that's been traded this day. I'm like, oh yeah, he's good anyway. But essentially, you get a guy who's going to come in. Okay, apparently Davis Bertans is also being traded to the Mavericks in that deal.
Okay.
Unless I've completely gotten it wrong. Who's
Nope.
this dude?
Nope.
No, that's true.
Right.
I just see sometimes I see like ats and I see people tweet them and I'm like, that could be fake. Let me go check it first. Yeah, but for the Dallas Mavericks, you get a guy that's going to be able to handle the ball. I know Spencer Dinwiddie didn't get along with all the teammates that he had in Washington. So for the Wizards, you might be looking at this and say, hey, we get a guy off of our team who really wasn't gelling with us. And we get a guy back in Porzingis who, you know, although the struggles are there and the injury history is there as well, the potential is off the chart, especially if you really want to put a contender around Bradley Beal. Which is, you know, funny to say out loud, but, you know, that's what the Wizards want to do. They want to compete. They want to, they're not willing to go back to those years where they were able to get the first pick because of John Wall, that toiling in mediocrity, that toiling and we're not any better than a 10th seed in the East. When you're as a franchise, when you're stuck in those muddy waters for the longest time, look at the New York Knicks as a perfect example. You want to get every ounce of talent that you can just to make those playoffs, just to sell those jerseys, just to sell those tickets. And for the Washington Wizards, when you add Kristaps Porzingis, a 7-footer who can shoot, a 7-footer who can defend the rim, and when he's healthy is a dominant player on the perimeter. And it's funny to say at 7 foot that he's a dominant perimeter player, but it's true. He can put up 30 and 12 in a night with good defense. And if you're the Washington Wizards and you're looking at yourself like, hey, we got nothing to lose. Spencer Dinwiddie wasn't even playing that well for us. A trade like that is just absolutely absurd for them. And I love it for the Wizards. I love it for the Dallas Mavericks. Now that I'm talking myself into it, I guess I love it for the Wizards. But yeah, I like this trade. What do you think? This trade deadline has been amazing, by the way. This rivals the year I remember sitting in math class and the 26, I think it was 2015, 2016, and at 3 o'clock, things were just flying off the count. I couldn't keep up with my Twitter.
Yeah, this is very, very similar vibes. I feel like the Washington Wizards surprisingly active at the trade deadline already in the past 40 minutes since we've started, Gary. They've traded away Montrezl Harrell, so all of a sudden we're asking ourselves, where is the size? And then they add Kristaps Porzingis. Exactly. They trade away Spencer Dinwiddie and Bertans, but then they also are getting Vernon Carey. They're getting Ish Smith. They traded away Aaron Holiday. There's a bunch of back and forths right here. I'm a big Spencer Dinwiddie fan. I knew once Bradley Beal went down that the season was sort of getting pushed aside. Remember last season how the Washington Wizards were one of the most exciting teams because you had Harrell, you had Kyle Kuzma, all these guys from the Lakers that went over to the Wizards in that trade, or over in free agency, I should say. And it was very interesting because they were all of a sudden winning games. It was translating in the NBA standings. This season, I think it's definitely kicked to the curb. Got to feel a little bad for Kristaps Porzingis considering his situation. But at the same time, I think this is a very, very interesting trade for the Dallas Mavericks. I'm wondering what they're going to do down low outside of Dwight Powell and Max Kleber, because I don't know if Davis Bertans is really the solution in the depth. But once again, I love Spencer Dinwiddie. He plays alongside Jalen Brunson. So there's a lot of depth in that guard depth chart for the Dallas Mavericks. But once again, I think this is a trade that could easily be a 50-50, and it's going to take a couple of months down the road before we say who the real winner of this deal is.
we forget that. I mean, you did mention it just now, so you don't forget, but I'm talking about the general NBA. We forget that around a month into the season, the Wizards were the first seed in the East. And a lot of people were not willing to talk about them because it seemed a little fluky. But I love the idea of the Wizards just kind of going, no, we're gonna actually try. We're not gonna kick the tires on next season at least. We might be a little bit shaken this year. We might be a little bit down after a couple of injuries. And yeah, I'm not quite sure what their standings in the East are right now. Let me go check that real quick, unless you have that.
While you check that,
Yeah.
alongside Kristaps Porzingis, the Wizards are also getting a second-round pick. So it's Porzingis and a second-round pick for Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. So it's an interesting deal altogether.
For the Mavericks, the idea of just putting a bunch of people around Luka that can shoot a lot better than they can right now is really intriguing to me. You saw that in a lot of LeBron James led teams where you just kind of need to put some dudes around him that can shoot. And Luka's that same mold of player. And I believe Luka's even said in the past that he models his game after LeBron. So it's really interesting to me to see the Mavericks kind of go, okay, if you want shooters, we'll get you some shooters. We might have to overpay a little bit. Davis Bertans makes a lot of money. But the Mavericks right now are looking to kind of unload their big guy. They're 32-23. They're the 5th seed in the West at the moment. And if you're the Dallas Mavericks, if you're Luka Doncic, if you're Luka Doncic specifically, is this enough to keep you? Spencer Dinwiddie's got a couple of years left on his deal. Is there another trade? Did I not see it? Oh, goodness.
No, so I was just going to throw in about this whole entire contract situation with the Dallas Mavericks. One point that's being brought up on Twitter right now and all over social media is this is actually a good trade for the Dallas Mavericks. Yes, it doesn't help them short term, but long term, looking at the different deals that are going on right now, Davis Bertans is being paid through the 2023 to 24 season. Over the next 3 seasons, he gets paid $16 million, $16 million, and $17 million, and then has an option in the 2024 to 25 season for another $16 million. And Porzingis, who infamously signed that 5-year, $158 million deal with the Dallas Mavericks, is still getting paid through the 2022 to 23 season. So over the next 2 seasons, he gets paid 31.6, and then he gets paid 33.8. And then 2023 to 24 has the opportunity to cash in on a player option that is going to be worth over $36 million in his age 28 season. So for the Dallas Mavericks, they haven't had the opportunity in the offseason to go after these big name free agents because they've had their hands tied behind their back when it comes to these contracts. But getting these contracts unloaded and onto a team with the Washington Wizards who can afford it, I think is a great trade for the Mavericks. I would give the Mavericks actually the benefit of the doubt when executing this trade, even though they're giving up the best player in the deal in Porzingis.
I agree in the way that you bring up the cap situation. When you have one single player making that much money, it's a lot harder to deal him than it would be if you had 2 players making the combined amount of that money. Now, that sounds obvious and it sounds like duh, but at the same time, you think about it in the way of, you can have Porzingis as the trade chip in your blockbuster deal. But really, at the end of the day, the NBA is made on those tiny little, and I say tiny, $60 million a year isn't tiny, but considering what you had in Porzingis, it's a much more tradable contract. And for Bertans, even though he's not had the best season of his career this year, you put him around Luka, and he's going to shoot a lot better just based off of gravity alone. But you also get a guy, like you mentioned, where you're not paying him as much as you would have to pay Porzingis in the future. I know that you had talked about this before we had gone live in general about just the cap flexibility of your favorite team, the Lakers, and how when you are like tied to a guy like this, and I'll bring up an example for me too, so that you can, we don't have to keep crapping on your team. When the Miami Heat signed Hassan Whiteside to a ludicrous deal, you're stuck in this purgatory of having to pay this guy who isn't doing what you want, isn't performing up to expectations. You have a guy who, you might be tied to him because his inability to play. Nobody's going to want to take that contract. Nobody's going to want to do this. And the fact that the the Mavericks were able to get better, or at least in my opinion, get better with this trade, just because of Porzingis' health concerns. The best ability is availability. So if you're trying to argue like, well, Porzingis is a better player, he doesn't play all that much. It gives the Mavericks cap flexibility. And for them, I love this trade. For the Wizards, I love this tweet. Tim Legler on ESPN, quote on Kristaps Porzingis. I think you saw this too from Hoop Central.
Yeah.
He's the unicorn because you hardly ever see him.
Yeah, and so I'm looking at a tweet that's right above it, actually, from Bobby Marks, who tweeted 3 minutes ago that the Dinwiddie edition actually gives Dallas sort of an insurance policy when it comes to this upcoming free agency, because they're going to have to address the contract of Jalen Brunson. Dinwiddie in his next 3 years that he's under contract for is owed 17.1, 18, and 18.9 million, with 10 million guaranteed on his contract. But then you compare that to Bertans, who had 16 million, 16 million, and 17 million. So Dinwiddie is far cheaper when it comes to contracts. And I think the Mavericks are a little bit worried that Brunson is going to be somewhat pricey because, like I said before, there's a lot of free agents out there that are just either restricted or have to decline their player option to even become available. I think this is going to be a very slow offseason, unfortunately. But when you're talking about Jalen Brunson, he might be one of the premier free agents for all we know. He plays at a very high level. He's young. He's hardly in his prime right now. But I think this is a great, like I said, I think this is a great future move for the Mavericks. They get Dinwiddie, who himself is a great player when put under the right system and surrounded by the right talent. But you're also talking about someone who's far cheaper when it comes to the cap space than someone with the likes of Bertans.
And for the Mavericks situation with Jalen Brunson, they had the opportunity to give him a contract extension last season, and he bet on himself. He did not accept it, and he was able to prove to the Mavericks that, hey, I'm a lot better than you thought I was, or if not maybe thought I was, but I bet on myself and I became a lot better to a lot of people. So I'm going to attract those bigger offers in the free agency. So with acquisition of Spencer Dinwiddie, it wouldn't surprise me if we see Jalen Brunson. And I'll tell you, Isaiah, Jalen Brunson might be a future New York Knick. I know you're watching right now, or if you will later, or whatever you're doing at the moment. Let's be honest with ourselves. With the cap space that the Knicks are going to have, or hopefully going to have after this trade deadline, trading away some of their bigger contract players. I know that he was very adamant to be he wants to get rid of Mitchell Robinson. He wants to get rid of Kemba, all that stuff. So, and we're not just shoehorning the Knicks into this conversation because it's true. Jalen Brunson might become a New York Knick next year just because of the ability. Oh, he says, I'm here. I don't want to hear it. I want to see it. True. Make some moves. Leon Rose.
Here's something interesting too, Gary, as Isaiah is watching by. According to Brian Windhorst, who has catapulted himself at the top of the media game right now, it seems like, for this trade deadline, after he was right and Woj was wrong about the James Harden, Ben Simmons situation. So the
Captain America Civil War.
So the Knicks and the Lakers yesterday were very close on a potential deal. And here's what I think the deal was. So this is a deal that fell apart, according to Brian Windhorst. But if you go into it, there was a rumored trade as of this morning, and this was the trade that was potentially going to happen. I have to go and find it. It was something on the lines of the Lakers were going to get Cam Reddish and Alec Burks from the New York Knicks, and it was going to be a 3-team trade in which the New York Knicks end up getting, I believe it was Goran Dragic and draft compensation. And then all of a sudden the Toronto Raptors were going to come in. They were going to take Nerlens Noel, and they were going to take one other player. I can't remember him off the top of my head. I believe it was someone from the Los Angeles Lakers, though. But it was essentially going to be a 3-team trade between the Knicks, the Lakers, and the Raptors. And we're now just seeing, with 8 minutes left in the trade deadline, that the trade has fallen apart. It doesn't look like the Los Angeles Lakers and the New York Knicks are going to get any sort of trade done. Russell Westbrook at this point seems like he's going to be stuck in Los Angeles through the trade deadline, pending the last couple of minutes here. It's really interesting because those are two teams that really needed to reshape everything.
I'm with the Dragic trade happening for Thaddeus Young, them switching places, Goran Dragic going to the Spurs and Thaddeus Young going to the Raptors. I like the acquisition for the Raptors. They get a good veteran in the back that's actually going to play on their team. And, I'm a big Heat fan. I love Dragic, but what he did to the Toronto Raptors this year is a little criminal, kind of rude, showing up at Heat games. I mean, I get the love, Heat culture, hashtag Heat culture. We're out here. But at the same time, Goran, come on, that ain't that professional. You kind of pride yourself on being a very professional point guard, very professional player, and then you're going to go and do the Raptors like that. That doesn't make any sense to me. But for the Spurs, they get a guy they're probably going to be able to buy out. And he, along with the guard rotation they already have there, is looking to probably sign with the Dallas Mavericks. So Goran Dragic going from possibly being a Knick. Well, I don't know he would have played for the Knicks, just in general because of the contract situation, him wanting to be bought out. Unfortunately for him, I don't believe he can sign to the Miami Heat this season because of him being traded. Even with the buyout, there's a lot of contract stipulations on trading someone and then having them being bought out and then going back to the original team that they were just traded from. That doesn't look too good. So possibly Goran Dragic, a big buyout guy this year. Speaking of that, if the Mavericks don't land him, which it looks like they might, a lot of teams could use his services in that Western Conference, especially someone like the Denver Nuggets, who need a couple of guys in their guard rotation. The Dallas Mavericks, of course, who are the lead to get him. The Lakers, who probably need a little bit more on the guard rotation. Just in general, Goran Dragic, a good player who's going to get you some buckets, although he's a little bit old. If he's bought out and the contract situation isn't as bad as it was previously, you could see him making a good move and going to the Mavericks, going to a good contender in the West, and possibly being an impactful player. But I don't think he would have been that for the Knicks. I think if he gets in that proverbial trade that was said to be created and turned down, I just don't see him making the impact that they need on that end. Dragic didn't have Riley keeping him in check, is what Isaiah says, which true. Have you ever, shameless promotion for another person's book, but Chris Herring released The Blood in the Garden, which is a book about the 1990s Knicks, and go read that book just in general to see how much of a dog Pat Riley is. He used to wear cleats to games to tell people to bash people's ankles in, like a second baseman, or like you would do to a shortstop on a turn 2 play. They're turning 2, going to first, runner slides in. I don't know. I just love Pat Riley. Unabashedly, unashamed, love him.
Something interesting too, I just wanted to bring up that as we close into the end of the trade deadline here, is that the Indiana Pacers, who you remember in the last hour or so, traded for Jalen Smith as part of their package deal. They're actually not even expected to retain Jalen Smith on their roster, and a team who has made literally zero noise at the trade deadline. I saw rumors that they wanted to go and add some sort of wing player, some sort of defensive talent, but the Denver Nuggets are actually in line to add Jalen Smith to their roster. I'm not sure if it's going to be a buyout situation. I'm not sure if there's a small trade coming, maybe a second round pick or so going back to Indiana for Jalen Smith, but I don't expect for Jalen Smith to land with the Indiana Pacers. That being said, I think the Nuggets are already in a great position. I don't think Jalen Smith is, too big of news when we have all these superstar players being moved back and forth. But once again, just a small update there.
Ooh, am I? Yeah, I am unmuted. Cool. I was eating a chip. I had to, we're doing this for a couple hours. I got to be all fueled up. So they get Jalen Smith. I like Jalen Smith. The Suns decided not to They decided not to sign him to his rookie deal, the little extension that you can give somebody after their first 2 seasons. They decided not to do it. I believe it's called there's a name for it. It's escaping me right now. Some sort of option. But they thought that they got Ayton. They got Joel McGee, and they just recently signed Bismack Biyombo, and he's been doing really well. So they thought to themselves, we can probably get rid of this guy just in terms of we got some center rotation depth. Unless I'm thinking of the wrong person. Am I right? Jalen
No,
Smith?
you're absolutely right.
Okay, cool. I was like,
Um,
there's so many Jalen's and Smiths. I might as
Yep.
well have been talking about somebody else. But Jalen Smith, um, you know, big center, gonna jump to the rim, gonna be a rim runner for you. And for the Pacers, I think it kind of just makes them younger, kind of gets rid of the contracts that they might have to sign in the future just because of they're kind of blowing it up right now. So I see the Pacers kind of benefiting from Jalen Smith and just hey, we're getting a little bit younger and a little bit of insurance if they do decide to move Miles Turner here in the next couple of minutes. I do want to talk about the Pacers a little bit more, but for the sake of time, we're about 2 minutes until the trade deadline ends. And if it's anything like a couple of years prior, we might just see like 16 deals happen in the next 2 minutes.
Very possible.
So,
I'm ready for it. I keep refreshing my page over and over again, Gary. It seems very
I hear it. I hear you smacking it. I like it.
Yep.
What is it? F5 season. Let's go. But we got the trade deadline coming to an end. Hopefully we get some big deals here in the next couple of minutes. It does take a little bit. We might not see the official deals happen. Oh, we got one?
Nope. We got a false report. Chad Ford from where's he even from? From ESPN, I think accidentally went in and quote tweeted a fake Chris Haynes, in which the fake report had Chris Bouchard and Malachi Flynn to the Houston Rockets for Eric Gordon and Daniel Tice. Come on, you got to choose better names.
Yeah.
The package deal. Come on, man.
Yeah, I first off, not a great trade for.
Oh, hold on. We do have a trade.
Okay.
So speaking of Daniel Tice, he is going back to the Boston Celtics from the Houston Rockets. So the Houston Rockets are trading Daniel Tice to the Boston Celtics. Details to come on that, but the Boston Celtics, add a familiar face to their roster.
They get another big man. We'll see what happens in this trade because they've got Robert Williams, they've got Al Horford, they got a couple of guys there who are already playing those kind of minutes. So let's see what they get for him. I mean, I hope that's not the last trade we get because although that is like kind of interesting, it's a little bit like deflating to end the entire day on. The last trade of the day was Daniel Tice, which good player, but it's kind of funny to think that.
Okay. How about this? How about we add this into it? The Boston Celtics in that trade package are sending Dennis Schroeder back to the Houston Rockets.
Okay.
Dennis Schroeder is on the move.
Interesting. They paid Russ 44 mil. Lol, isn't that what the Celtics broadcast said at the beginning of the season? And now he's not even on the team anymore. So, Dennis Schroeder, I guess he's going to give some competition to Jalen Green over there in Houston. At the same time, it does look like a better trade for the Celtics just because I don't know if you saw a couple of days ago, last couple of seconds on the shot clock, Jaylen Brown's over there waving his hands to get the ball, and then Dennis Schroeder just takes a contested shot at the end of the shot clock. So maybe the old brass there, general manager there in Boston, what's his name? He used Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens saw that and was like, yeah, we got to get this guy out of here. I like Tice. Let's bring him back. And for the Rockets, you get a veteran point guard who's going to be around your younger guys and make a better example than John Wall did. So that's a plus. At least he'll be playing. And for the Celtics, you just got to get rid of a guy who, in my honest opinion, is a little bit overrated when it comes to being a good ball handler in this league. Yeah. Good decision maker. He doesn't really have much other than a crafty little offensive game. He's not playing like a great amount of defense. And for Daniel Tice, this Boston Celtics team needs a little bit of grit, a little bit of like toughness, and I believe he brings that to the team. Do you have any opinions on a trade that? Are we getting another one?
So the opposite actually is that the Los Angeles Lakers are not expected to make any trades at the trade deadline. I don't even know if that Terrence Ross one is going to come into fruition. I know the Lakers were expected to trade for Terrence Ross, but Absolutely radio silence for the Los Angeles Lakers. Bill O'Rom reports, I'm told not to expect any last-minute deals for the Lakers. Despite several efforts, they were unable to get anything done before the deadline. This is their team. So, man.
As a Lakers fan, Devin,
yeah.
I have to ask you, just in general, are you happy? Like at all? Like with the fact that they didn't make any moves? Like I hate to like just dig the knife in a little bit deeper, but that's where we're here.
So
we're here to watch miserable people be miserable. And that's what we are as an NBA fans. We're a little bit miserable because of, we all have these high expectations of our team. The Lakers were a team that were going to be the number 1 seed. I literally go back in time, go to my article or go to our article where our preseason predictions. I predicted the Lakers would win the freaking title. I thought they were going to win the NBA Finals because I believed in LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and I believed in Russell Westbrook.
Yeah.
What do you think about this?
So here's my problem with the Lakers, and I watched them lose to a G League or a JV high school basketball team last night in the Portland Trailblazers, who are without Damian Lillard, no longer have CJ McCollum, and their best player was Simmons. This is an absolute atrocity of a team. What was the joke that you posted earlier today in our group chat, Gary, about Talen Horton-Tucker should stand for trade him today.
Yeah,
trade him today. And unfortunately, they didn't. So here's my theory about the Los Angeles Lakers. There's a report that came out a few days ago in which LeBron James apparently is going to leave the Lakers to whatever team drafts Bronny James. And the more that I think about it, the more it actually might make sense. It's NBA history. LeBron James is so egotistical that he actually might just do that. And in return, why would LeBron need to go out of his way to make so many trades today? Why, if the team is already in shambles? This is a team that is far worse than it was in that NBA bubble season. I would take Kyle Dogwater Kuzma over any of these bench players that the Lakers have to offer. I'm watching Wayne Ellington shoot the basketball 10 times a game, and I'm watching all of these like veterans that are just no longer capable of making a significant impact in the NBA. Yeah, Wayne Ellington, Wayne Ellington. It's so disappointing. Russell Westbrook, a failed experiment. Anthony Davis, I have a feeling that in the next couple of years, once LeBron James leaves Los Angeles Lakers, the Los Angeles Lakers are going to turn into that New Orleans Pelicans team that just couldn't do anything and just gave the ball to Anthony Davis in the post over and over again. Let him stat pad for his whole entire career. That way he comes across like he actually made an impact, like he's a top 100 NBA player in NBA history, like some sources want to say, when in reality, this is a team that is an absolute embarrassment. It is an embarrassment to root for this team, and they ought to be ashamed of themselves. Frank Vogel, I'm coming for your job eventually.
So I do want to put a little silver lining on this, because I do think that there is a positive spin that we could put on the Lakers for this. When you are LeBron James and you have a team that has the possibility of winning the NBA Finals, it would be silly for that team not to do everything they can to try to get you there. However, the Lakers do not have the picks that is required to make a lot of these deals happen. And specifically, the pick that they have remaining is their 2027 first round pick, which to us seems like that's literally an 8th grader. Like we're not going to think about that right now. However, you're the Lakers and you're Jeannie Buss and you're looking at yourself and you you look in the mirror and you think to yourself, okay, we've got a guy who is the best player in the world on any given night if he plays to the level we expect him to in LeBron James. We've got an incredible second fiddle and Anthony Davis. The possibility of them leaving, especially due to the fact that this team didn't live up to the expectations, is a lot higher than a lot of people want to admit. And you had mentioned Bronny James being drafted and LeBron possibly following him to whatever team. So you got to think to yourself, if you're the Lakers, what's the point of trading the entire farm right now, plus your first round picks, for a guy who might possibly, like Russell Westbrook was rumored in a trade for John Wall with a first round pick from the Lakers to make that trade happen. Cool, that happens. When LeBron James's contract is up and Anthony Davis' contract is up, that Lakers team is not going to be as good as they were 2 years ago, last year, hell, even this year. So you have to think to yourself, we need to not only just prepare for the worst, but we need to prepare for the possibility of these two players either leaving, not, with LeBron James retiring in 3 years. He's 36, 37 years old. He's going to need a lot of players around him to keep up with the level of load management that he's had to go through. And I say load management in the way that he has to manage his load while he's playing because he doesn't have a good enough team to surround himself so that he can take those games off like Kawhi did. So if you're the Lakers, you're thinking to yourself, why would I make all these blow up trades right now? Why would I make all these, let's throw all these first round picks at him? Because you never know. LeBron James might not be there in 2026. He might not be there in 2027. Either he leaves, he's retired, or something happens and he's not on the team anymore. You have to be prepared as an organization to keep your future intact. We saw it happen with Brooklyn a while ago when they traded for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, and that didn't work out. And then they were in some sort of weird, we don't have any picks purgatory for years. And the Lakers can look literally right across the water or right across the United States. I guess if you were going the other way, that would be ridiculous. The entire continent of Asia, Africa, and Europe, you look right across there. No, you can look at the Nets and think to yourself, we don't want to be that. We don't want to trade everybody and completely risk our future when, you can tell. There's a couple of quotes from Frank Vogel last night and LeBron James. Just essentially, they gave up on this season, it already feels like. So I am not shocked at all that they don't make any moves just based on the fact that they're trying to keep their future intact. But as a Lakers fan, do you care about that? Or do you just want to win? I mean, obviously you want to win, but you're young. Do you want to watch when you're in your 30s, like a really bad Lakers team? I don't think you do.
Did you happen to see last night, there was a clip. I was watching the game from start to finish for whatever reason. I don't know how they scammed me into watching that game. There was a clip in which LeBron believes he was hit in the head, and he sits in the front row of the stands and just doesn't go back to play defense whatsoever. Did you see that clip? So he goes up for a layup, and somebody swipes at the ball, and it hardly touches him. And LeBron James, if he thinks he's getting touched, he covers his head and he just walks around. So he gets hit, and there's a no call. So it's a no call. You have the right to complain or whatever. The game is continuing, and we're on the other side of the floor. The camera pans over to LeBron, who is quite literally sitting in the first row of the stands in between a couple and just not playing basketball whatsoever for a good 5 to 7 seconds, and then casually decides to walk his way back to half court before the Portland Trailblazers go and score themselves. I believe it was just a layup, or maybe it was a jump shot. It was 2 points, I believe, that the possession cost them. But the Los Angeles, like LeBron at this age, and there's the fact that this team is so defeated, I'm not going to lie to you. He's got a losing mentality. LeBron James, one of the best players in NBA history, has a crybaby loser mentality. And Anthony Davis and him, the clip that I saw last night too, is people should have known that there was chemistry issues with the Los Angeles Lakers. I don't know if you remember this. In game 2 of the regular season, when Anthony Davis and Dwight Howard quite literally almost got in a fist fight on the sideline during a timeout, that's when the chemistry issues had started, and they haven't had the opportunity to look back right there. Absolutely embarrassing. And as we look towards these trades that are getting made, I know I have to update this, but Houston's also getting Enes Freedom and Bruno Fernando as part of the deal that involves Daniel Tice and Dennis Schroeder right here.
Wow. So essentially let me see here. I heard what you said, but I was trying to get something on the computer here. But Dennis Schroeder, Enes Freedom, Bruno Fernando for Daniel Tice.
Yep.
Sounds like to me, in my honest opinion, that the Celtics kind of overpaid for Daniel Tice, if I'm being quite honest.
I think so.
Dennis Schroeder and his freedom. That's 3 players for Daniel Tice. I think if you told me before 3 o'clock that the Celtics were going to get Daniel Tice and it took 3 players to get him, I wouldn't have believed you. Not only because that's just a steep price for Daniel Tice. which rhymes. You know, I'm a rapper. Why not? Steep price for Daniel Tice. But no, that's just a lot of players for him. Let me see here. There's a couple more things we got going on. Adrian Wojnarowski. Sorry, Isaiah. And we're going to have him on here hopefully soon to talk about the Knicks here. I want to just let him. Because I kind of need to go to the bathroom, so I'm hoping that he's got like about 20 minutes of him in him of just like yelling about stuff. But no deals for the Knicks. Source tells ESPN from Adrian Wojnarowski. No deals for the Knicks this deadline. Yeah. I'll be ready to come on.
Yeah, go ahead. Two quick updates. So I'll let you go and do that, and I'll update the people that are watching.
No, I'm fine. I want to wait until Isaiah gets back.
Okay, so two quick updates. The Lakers, they tried to acquire Terrence Ross ahead of the deadline, but the Magic, I guess, were asking a little bit too much. It makes me think off of speculation that they wanted some sort of draft compensation, or maybe they were asking for Talen Horton-Tucker and some sort of draft pick, which is just absolutely absurd. I'd rather have Talen Horton-Tucker than Terrence Ross to begin with, but I would have been fine trading off a Trevor Ariza or one of the other veteran players in exchange. And the Rockets that we just talked about are going to actually waive Enes Freedom. So Enes Freedom is not going to remain with the Houston Rockets. He'll have the opportunity to sign with a contender or a team of his choice.
I really don't think Enes Freedom moves the needle for most players, or most teams in general. He wasn't even really that, impactful off the bench for the Celtics. And, I'm going to get labeled a bunch of labels for saying that, but it's true. I honestly, he's kind of not the player that he used to be. That's about all I want to spend on him, just because as a basketball fan watching Enes Freedom, it's so hard to say that after 8 years of saying his previous name. But watching him play basketball is like, it's like watching a turnstile door, like just something that just keeps rotating. Like he just lets people go in. There's no defense. Admirable what he fights for, but at the same time, to me, looking at this deal, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. The Rockets would have waived him. There's no way that they would have played him over Sengun or Christian Wood, or if he even stays on this team, would he even get any minutes? And I don't really think he would have anyway.
Yeah, so I'm looking right now to see if there's anything in between. There's a confirmation that the Miami Heat did not make a move today. What do you think of that? The Miami Heat, who are in the mix in the Eastern Conference, trying to get themselves into the title picture. They see the Philadelphia 76ers improve. They see the Brooklyn Nets improve. They see the Boston Celtics making some moves. I don't know necessarily that they got better, but the Miami Heat just sort of stayed still, and they gained a pick for Okpala, and that was about it.
Yeah, I didn't think that they were going to do anything super drastic. The idea, of course, was you would move Duncan Robinson at the deadline, although he is being paid an absorbent amount of just a ridiculous amount of money. I honestly didn't expect them to make anything huge. The word around Miami had essentially been that unless the trade is for Duncan Robinson and we can get back a guy who is just as impactful on a good night, I don't see it happening. Especially when you consider that they still haven't even played Victor Oladipo, who's coming back from an injury. I think the Miami Heat kind of look at their team and think to themselves, we got a bunch of guys who are going to play their hardest, and making a trade right now, especially as the first seed in the East. Yes, you see the Sixers doing that. And yeah, you see the Nets doing this. And, it's you're trying to get to that top spot and trying to be the contender. But honestly, Duncan Robinson is too good on a good night to just trade him away for a pack of peanuts. And I am kind of happy about KZ Okpala leaving. I'm not happy about the fact that a couple seasons ago, we traded 2 second-round picks to get him. And then we're only getting one. We traded 3 essentially to get him. And we're getting one back from the Nuggets, or from the, I said that earlier, didn't I? From the OKC Thunder. Yeah, I don't really think, he wasn't playing. He's not very good. The Heat kind of took a flyer on him in general. He was a 6'9" guy with a 7'2" wingspan. And while he was in general promising, we had a lot of expectations that just didn't live up to it. And it's just like any rookie that you draft in the second round. You see the flashes. You see him averaging like 15 and 5 on 36% shooting in college. I know that off the top of my head because I read all this stuff and hear about it. And like, at the same time, you thinking like, yeah, he could work out. He couldn't. But people blew him up like he was supposed to be the next Kevin Durant. Kind of like that Bruno Caboclo guy that was drafted a couple of years back. Like the Brazilian KD or whatever they called him. Every team's going to hype up their second round picks. I just didn't see this. That's the last I ever want to talk about KZ Okpala. Bye. Have fun in the Thunder playing 28 minutes a game for a team that doesn't matter.
Right. So it's interesting. The teams that were the most active in this trade deadline, clearly the teams that are going to be the most active are more than likely going to be sellers than buyers, just based off of the number of transactions that you make. The top 3 teams that engaged in the most transactions were the Washington Wizards, who did 4 different trades today. And then you have a tie for the next man up between the Boston Celtics and the Indiana Pacers. And if you're looking at it, the Boston Celtics, Indiana Pacers, and Washington Wizards, one of those teams don't belong in that conversation as a seller. Yep. You would have thought that the Boston Celtics, in my opinion, would have been, trying to upgrade or even try to make a splash. I know we were talking earlier about the potential of Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum being moved. We all knew that Jason Tatum was going to get moved, but there was a lot of rumors earlier on in the season that Jaylen Brown might get moved. And instead, it seems like, look at the trades that they made in this. They do Bol, PJ Dozier, and a second-round pick in cash. And I just don't understand it, because then all of a sudden you're getting Romeo Langford, Josh Richardson, and a first for Derek White. Derek White is going to be under contract for all the way through the 2024 to 25 season, but his cap hit is 15.1, 16.4, 17.6, and 18.8 4 years down the road. So it seems like the Boston Celtics were more sellers than buyers in this. I'm interested to see what they're going to do this upcoming offseason. I don't think they're going to be in the title picture quite yet this season, especially with the overhaul we just saw with the Brooklyn Nets and the Philadelphia 76ers. And then you still have to go through the Chicago Bulls, Miami Heat, so on and so forth. But I'm interested to see the direction that they go in.
I kind of get what the Celtics are doing. In a sense, they're, in a way, not punting, but they might as well be trying for a 62-year-old field goal just because it's better than giving it's like the last minute of the quarter. They're just trying what they can to score some points, because at the end of the day, what they're doing right now is trying to get some cap space for the offseason. Just in general, they want that, like, and I mean cap space because they are paying Derek White a lot of money now, but more so in that way of, we're going to try to get a lot of players off of our books that we're going to have to pay in the future. Romeo Langford's a guy that his contract's coming up pretty soon for an extension. If you want to pay him, you're going to have to pay him a lot. Josh Richardson's no longer under contract after this season, so if you want to keep him, you're going to have to pay a lot. These are guys who, they're willing to get off of because of the potential of the pay that they're going to have to give them. I just hope for Celtics fans, not that I have that much, Heat Celtics, pretty big rivalry in my book, especially in those 08, 2013, 2014 years, those in between those times. You're going to have to look at this and think to yourself, are we wasting Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum's primes? I mean, they're not super old yet. Of course, they're still young. But you got to get, especially with 2 superstars like that, you have to fill them with the talent as quick as you can, because you never know when that goes away. You never know. An injury happens. Something goes wrong. A player gets offended. Something, chemistry screws up. And then all of a sudden, Jaylen Brown's playing for another team, or Jason Tatum requests a trade. Mm-hmm. This isn't a team makeup specifically with their 2 stars that they can play around with a lot of stuff. And the same sentiment when it comes to Dallas, which, if you want to compare the two, Dallas did everything they could this season, this trade deadline, getting Spencer Dinwiddie, to try and get Luka some help on that end of the court. If you're the Celtics, you hope to God that they stay, because if you look back at their trade history, once Kyrie was gone, the Celtics have not really done what you would expect as a way to keep two guys that important around for a very long time. And yeah, they can throw as much money at them as they want, but I just hope for Celtics fans that they don't see them playing for other teams because of the lack of front office aggressiveness, if I want to put it that way. But yeah, this trade deadline looks like it's a little bit over. Are we getting any more trades? I'm seeing the Lakers will monitor the buyout market, which you know, I too go to the food court and hope for free samples. But you know,
yeah. I mean, listen,
just
if they
worry
need
about
some,
them.
they need some size. Maybe we'll add NS Freedom to our roster. Maybe him and LeBron can play, work out their issues together.
Wow, wouldn't that be a pair?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, this has been interesting for the most part. I love a lot of the moves that get made. I know you saw this tweet because I saw you interacting with a little bit. Ben Simmons already has talked to KD and Sean Marks. He's getting ready to come back. It's going to take a little bit of time to get him back, but it's a great step in the right direction is what Rich Paul tells ESPN. I want to ask you this because I don't think that there's a wrong answer. I'll ask it two different ways. So these two teams play each other on March 10th. So we get about a month before they play one another. Who are you taking in that game? And then in addition, in a 7-game series where both teams, we're going to assume in both situations, both teams are going to be healthy 100% in this case. Who would you take in a 7-game series? So the one game on March 10th, give all or take all, and then a 7-game series if these two teams interact in the playoffs.
So this is the question. The follow-up question I have for your question. Is this a Nets home game or a Sixers home game?
I'm going to look right now.
Because if it's a Nets home game.
No, it's a 76ers home game.
Okay, so you got Kyrie. So the possibility of the Brooklyn Nets doing a little bit more on that end just because of the inclusion of Kyrie Irving. Yeah. You know, if they play at home, Kyrie can't play. Right. So you have to think to yourself, that's a very important part, especially in a 7-game series. I personally, with the makeup of their team now, I would probably lean towards the Brooklyn Nets, especially if they have Kyrie Irving. But it's a great question to think about. In a 7-game series, and you've got people to match up against Kevin Durant, you got like a Matisse Thybulle, you've got a Joel Embiid to switch onto them. You got to think to yourself, okay, the Brooklyn Nets are a lot more experienced than the 76ers team, at least in terms of their rotation around Joel Embiid and James Harden. They've got a lot more younger guys. I mean, you got Danny Green there, but you're also relying on Tyrese Maxey in his first real impactful season in the NBA to do something on that end in the playoffs. He doesn't have the playoff experience that a lot of these guys need to be an impactful player in your first year playing for a serious contender. Mm-hmm. So if I'm honest, I'd go with the Nets just on the basis of they've got the more experience. They've got a little bit more flexibility when it comes to positional play. And yeah, to me, it seems like the starting lineup would probably be something like Patty Mills, Kyrie Irving, which, you know, probably has a little bit of defensive liability. I wonder if Steve Nash would consider putting a guy like Bruce Brown in that starting lineup just instead because of the defensive impact that he has. You know, you're hopefully you get Joe Harris back. Oh, what am I saying? They got Steph Curry. It's going to be Kyrie, Seth.
Here's what I'm going to ask you. Don't forget they have Ben Simmons now too.
They do. Oh my God.
So this is
what's
what I'm
going
asking.
on?
Because I'm looking at it right now. I'm asking. So I just looked this up as you were talking. Seth Curry is playing 34.8 minutes per game, and so is he coming off of the bench in this case? Because fully healthy, you're probably going some sort of combination of what? You're going to go Kyrie at point guard. You're going to have to play. So just without positions, without everything, just a starting 5. You have to play Ben Simmons. You have to play Kevin Durant. That's 2 out of your 5. You have to play Kyrie, Ben Simmons, Kevin Durant. That's 3 out of your 5. So now you're filling up the rest of your roster with either Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, Blake Griffin is out there for opportunities. Like you said, Joe Harris, maybe.
Yeah, I would, if I'm the Nets, I'd probably start Ben at the point, Kyrie at the 2. He's been playing a lot of 2 this year with James Harden running the point there. probably Joe Harris at the 3, KD at the 4, and Andre Drummond at the 5. And honestly, that's really solid. That is really solid.
Yeah.
Especially considering the defensive liability that they've had in that backcourt recently. So getting a Ben Simmons to anchor that defense. And don't forget, Ben Simmons is one of the best defenders in the NBA when he plays. So pair that with Kevin Durant, who in his own right is a top 5 offense, no matter what. Then put Kyrie Irving next to him, and then give him a guy in Ben Simmons who not only can defend, but also pass the ball to both of those guys. He's a lob threat for passing to Andre Drummond. He's a lob threat himself. And the more and more I think about it, the more these Brooklyn Nets teams are looking to me like the favorite to come out of the East. That being said, there's a lot of things that could happen since then, or till then. Depending on how Ben Simmons looks when he gets back. I assume it's going to take him about 2 or 3 weeks to ramp up back to playing shape. I know he had talked about that previously. Ramona Shelburne's piece a couple of weeks ago, or I believe at least a week ago at this point, mentioned that whatever team he goes to, and now we know it's the Brooklyn Nets, he's going to need a little bit to ramp back up into playing shape. It's not like he's going to have any issue with Steve Nash as his coach, just because of the mutual respect in terms of like passing and that regard. And Steve Nash is a great coach in his own right. I just hope that for basketball fans' sake, that Ben Simmons is the same player we saw a couple of years ago. Not the Ben Simmons in the playoffs, but the Ben Simmons that was scoring 42 points on the Defensive Player of the Year against the Utah Jazz. When Joel Embiid was out, Ben Simmons looked like a top 10 player in the NBA. And now, of course, you have to be consistent with that. But yeah, this Nets team is scary. I think that'd be the great word to use. If they're all healthy and you've got all these guys, they're scary, because Seth Curry coming off the bench with those 5 starting is just insane.
Mm-hmm. So based off of current health, right? So obviously Kevin Durant is not healthy. Looks like Seth Curry's been dealing with an injury. Ben Simmons still has to work to get himself back in. But the next, listed on the Brooklyn Nets depth chart by ESPN, they have the Brooklyn Nets playing small ball right now. I'm sure they're going to experiment with a ton of different lineups, but they have Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving, Seth Curry, Kessler Edwards, and Nick Claxton rounding out their starting 5, which would mean that still your depth coming off is going to be some sort of combination of Patty Mills, James Johnson, Blake Griffin, Andre Drummond, LaMarcus Aldridge, and then you're just basically waiting for Kevin Durant to get back, because I think once you get Kevin Durant back, he probably replaces Kessler Edwards in that case. I still think you play Seth Curry in that starting 5. And then it rounds out Kyrie, Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, probably play Kevin Durant down at the 4. And to be honest, it doesn't matter who you play at the 5, because those 4 players are going to absolutely dominate the ball from start to finish.
The guy, whoever plays the 5, and if it is Andre Drummond, they'll basically be like, you got 2 jobs: defend and rebound. And if there's one thing that Andre Drummond can do, it's rebound like a boss. So I don't think they'll have to worry about anything on that end. I do like the idea of a bench for that team that includes DeAndre Bembry, just because his ability to just kind of work within the offense. In a couple of games that he's played in the starting lineup this year, especially with Kevin Durant. Now, that being said, putting anyone next to Kevin Durant probably leads to some good success, but he's looked good out there. So I'm impressed that the Nets were able to get back what they got, considering how it felt stale at that point in the day when we were talking about James Harden and Ben Simmons, and you putting that trade deadline tracker together. And we even talked about it before, like, there's so much coming out about James Harden and Ben Simmons and this trade that we're not even going to look at this kind of stuff, because at some point it's all smoke and mirrors and it's all just people trying to get clicks on the internet. But then it happens and you see the pack they get for him, and it's cool. Like, just as a basketball fan, it's cool to watch. It's like an NBA 2K. Like, all of a sudden you're like, oh, look, this guy's playing for this team. Wild. And the the Minnesota Timberwolves trade for Nikola Jokic in those scenarios. And you're like, what? This is weird. Why would that ever happen? But then it happens in real life. It happens. James Harden for Ben Simmons. If you told me that 2 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you, especially because 2 years ago, James Harden was a rocket. And for the 76ers, do you see them being as scary as of course, James Harden hasn't been himself this year, although the stats show a little bit of a dip. He's still playing some pretty good basketball when he tries, and I think that's the main part. Do you think this rejuvenates James Harden into a level where he is that MVP that he was not just a season ago? I mean, last year we had talk of, I know he hasn't played all that much, and he kind of screwed up his team earlier, but James Harden might be an MVP candidate. So do you think he gets there?
I think James Harden, like I said earlier in the show, I think he's in a better situation now than he was on the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets, the reason I didn't think he was going to work is because for a similar reason I didn't think that the Los Angeles Lakers were going to work before the season started, is because of this usage rate stat and the fact that Kevin Durant constantly needs the ball in his hands. Kyrie Irving is going to have to take his shots, and it's going to take away opportunities from James Harden. And when you're talking about the egos of some of these players, such as James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving, they need the numbers to carry the momentum for their team. And James Harden just wasn't in the right situation. I think he knew that really early into the season. I'm looking at the starting five projected depth chart for the 76ers. It's Tyrese Maxey, James Harden at the 2, Matisse Thybulle at the 3. You get Tobias Harris at the 4, and Joel Embiid at the 5. That sounds a lot more like James Harden's style of play, where he can take a lot of shots still. Yes, you're playing with somebody as good as Joel Embiid that needs to get fed down low. But outside of that, I mean, Tobias Harris, Maxey, and Thybulle don't really command a lot of shots. And then you're also talking about a depth chart that doesn't really command a lot of minutes altogether. Shake Milton, Danny Green, Charles Bassey, all these other guys. I think James Harden is in an opportunity where he can go back to his more custom style of play, where he's playing high 30s for the minutes, and he's also putting up almost 30 points a game. I didn't get the feeling that the Brooklyn Nets were going to be as serious of a contender as people were making them out to be in the preseason, just because, like I said, of the egos and the number of attempts that each of those guys were going to make. Everybody was expected to take a hit when it came to their stats. Kevin Durant saw the same hit when he went to the Golden State Warriors at one point in time. But, I mean, there's a difference in the chemistry that has been set in Brooklyn than the one that was originally set in Golden State. I think this is going to be a good move on behalf of all parties. For the 76ers, I think their rate – I do think that the 76ers and the Brooklyn Nets might be the two teams that eventually square off in the Eastern Conference Finals, actually, which is going to be very exciting. I mean, you're going to get the Chicago Bulls that are going to make some noise. But if somebody were to upset the Chicago Bulls in a 7-game series, you got to think it's either going to be the Philadelphia 76ers or the Brooklyn Nets.
Those are, at this point, other than, I mean, in my honest opinion, I think the Bucks belong in that conversation just because of the Greek freak himself, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Just on a level of, he is just an absurd offensive and defensive player. We all know that. I'm not breaking any news here to say that Giannis is a top 3 player in the NBA. But at the same time, we forget about that sometimes just because Milwaukee isn't the biggest market. They didn't do that well this season just because of some injuries to some key players, but they are still up there when it comes to scary teams to face off against. However, I do want to push back on something that you had mentioned with James Harden and specifically Tobias Harris. I watched a couple of 76ers games this year, as much as I could stomach, at least. And they're a good team. Joel Embiid is the nexus of that team. He is the centerpiece, and they're not going to go anywhere without him. But now that they have James, he has a little bit of leeway, especially considering his injury history. He doesn't have to do as much on the offensive and on the offensive end. He still has to do a lot on the defensive end, to be honest. But the thing that I worry about the most is the ability for Tobias Harris to kind of just think that he is that guy who, although he is getting paid like a max player, Tobias Harris has a tendency to do a lot of nothing with the ball. And I mean that in a way as nice as I can, in the sense that he's going to take those pull-up twos, those fading twos, nothing crazy. He's not shooting 30 times a game, but those are 8 to 12 possessions, sometimes 15 a game where you're thinking to yourself, yeah, man, there's must have been a better shot there. And I hope for his sake that he figures out a way to work with James Harden, specifically in the way that James likes to dominate the ball, hold it a lot, wait until the moment that he needs to pass the ball to the open man. Maybe that means he's driving in and kicking. Maybe that means he's doing some dribble moves on the end, and then he just expects the first 3-point shooter to pass to shoot it up. But I hope for Tobias Harris' sake that he finds a way to fit into that offense, just in the sense that he can't take those contested 2-point shots anymore, because there's so much more pressure on him as an offensive player because of the new guys around him. When you had Ben Simmons, you could give the ball to Tobias Harris and let him work, because Ben's not going to shoot the amount that Tobias is. He's going to have a lot less shots now because of James Harden there. James Harden isn't going to just start all of a sudden becoming a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shot a game guy. Ben Simmons is that guy. So if you're looking for if you're Tobias Harris, you have to think to yourself, my role might be a little bit diminished here, but that does not mean that I cannot still be a very effective player on offense because I'm surrounded with so much talent. The shots are going to be there for him if he wants to take the ones that are given to him, because he does have a tendency to kind of pull up a little bit too much from a range that he doesn't make enough of to justify. He's not DeMar DeRozan. He's not those guys he's not LaMarcus Aldridge when he played for Portland or the Spurs. He needs to kind of relax on the 2-point shots from the mid-range, because although he likes shooting them, he doesn't have the capability to not only just shoot them, but to tell James, hey, I'm going to shoot this 2-point contested shot. And James Harden's like, but why? When I'm wide open for 3? Or why? When Joel Embiid is right there in the post. So I hope for his sake that he can figure out a way to get into this offense. I believe we got Isaiah coming in around 4:00. Yeah, I'm going to be for Isaiah here, and for everybody else, we're going to be streaming here until about 4:45, 5 p.m. Trying to go for a good amount of time here. I did want to talk about some other trades that happened throughout the week. One trade I
wanted to bring up, as like I said, I didn't know who you were going to pivot to, but one trade that I was anxious to talk about, Gary, was one that was actually already implemented before today, and it was one that came into fruition, and we got to see it actually on the court last night.
Yep, this is exactly what I was going to talk about.
With Domantas Sabonis. You know me, I love my my sports bets. I bet against Sabonis against my will, because he does this to me all the time, and he got me right there in the hook. I bet 26.5 under for points and assists, and of course he finishes with 27 combined points and assists. But I'll tell you what, I don't know if you had the chance to watch a clip or two of this Kings team, but De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis are going to be a real problem for some of these teams. And it was really interesting just because this was a team that not a lot of people consider a contender in the Western Conference. But the report, I guess, that was coming out, there was 2 different reports. So before they traded for Domantas Sabonis, is going to love this. The Kings were actually looking at trading for Julius Randle at one point in time. Those trade talks fell through, and then they pivoted over towards Domantas Sabonis instead. They got Sabonis, and the intention of grabbing a Sabonis or a Randle or someone else that's going to elevate their play is because the Kings are one of those teams that actually aren't kicking away this season, unlike the Lakers, unlike the Knicks, unlike the Wizards, unlike the Celtics. They're actually going for a play-in tournament spot, which is really interesting because I think they could give a couple of different teams some trouble. But it was just really cool to see Sabonis in a different uniform, but still playing at that same level, if not better, because he was getting a lot of opportunities really early. And he literally came onto a plane, traveled to Sacramento, came off the plane, went to the court over at Sacramento, and then put up those numbers. Hadn't met anybody, hadn't practiced with those players, just absolutely dominated in that game though.
I love the idea just in general of Domantas Sabonis on this Kings team, and you are completely correct. Watching him play off of De'Aaron Fox, and watching him just kind of like, oh yeah, I just got off the plane. Let me go put up 22-14. It's really fun to watch. Domantas Sabonis pass the ball, of course. He's got that level of offensive fluidity that you need when you have a two-guard lineup with people like De'Aaron Fox and Davion Mitchell, who aren't necessarily the greatest passers on the planet. So when you get a guy who can play make out of the post, that transforms your offense. And you know me, we've talked about this in the past. Go look at our clips on YouTube. Go watch Deep Takes from 3. I have not been in the past the biggest Domantas Sabonis fan. That is not to say that he is not a good NBA player. My point was more so that when he is your best player, your ceiling is not as high as it should be for a guy who you expect to be that level of offensive production. He's not the best defensive center. He was kind of helped out by Miles Turner when he played for the Pacers in that regard. But for this Kings offense, you watch them play. There was a clip I saw on online the other day, or yesterday, I guess, today. I don't remember what it was. It was essentially Domantas Sabonis took the ball in the post. He passed it to Davion Mitchell. Instead of this dude going and trying to back down whoever he had him behind him, he passed it right back to Davion Mitchell. And you could see Mitchell going like, well, hold on, what? They can do that? Like, there's not just going to be a big offensive hole in the center and I can just kind of like give it to somebody. Like, they're not just going to shoot the moment I pass it to him. And so Davion Mitchell is able to drive in, kick out to an open three-point shooter who then makes the shot. And for Domantas Sabonis on this Kings team, people are looking at this as a kind of we need to get to the playoffs, so let's just get an all-star for what we can so that we don't disappoint our fans. And maybe it works, and maybe the Kings go on a run and they make the playoffs and they actually do something in that regard. For the last 15 years, they haven't made it. So it would probably be a good thing just for the heart conditions of all Sacramento fans and just in their blood pressure in general, just getting to be able to watch a team that's winning instead of the disappointment that they have been the past couple of years. Decade and a half, actually. So you'd brought up that Domantas Sabonis just kind of transforms this offense on a level that, although Tyrese Halliburton is a good player, can't really do all that much. And especially considering he's able to work off of De'Aaron Fox so well. I worry about their three-point shooting. Sabonis isn't the best shooter. We saw that in OKC. He's, he can hit the mid-range a little bit, but he's not shooting threes. De'Aaron Fox, not that great of a three-point shooter either. I hope for their sake they figure out a way to work around that. They did last night. And I like this trade for both teams in that sort of like we get to watch them do what they want to do. The Kings, although they might have sacrificed a little bit of their future, and Tyrese Halliburton, who's a very promising player, their ability to just kind of say, I don't care what the rest of the internet thinks or what, the normal people in the NBA think. We're going to go out and get this guy because he's an all-star and he can transform our offense overnight, literally overnight. He steps off of a plane and puts up 22, 14, and 5. Like just awesome. But switching over to the Pacers, what do you think about this deal? They get back in the trade. They get back Tyrese Halliburton, who in his own right, 21 years old, is just an incredibly efficient player. They get back Buddy Hield and Tristan Thompson, and all they really had to give up was Sabonis, who they were looking to load off anyway, Justin Holiday and Jeremy Lamb, who did really well for Sacramento last night. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Tyrese Halliburton on this Pacers team, who are looking to go a little bit younger now that they got rid of that? They're a little bit of, they got rid of Karis LeVert, they get rid of Domantas Sabonis.
Yeah, so my understanding is, this was one of the first waves of this trade deadline, and it was really interesting because I guess from a few different sources is that executives around the league didn't even know that Tyrese Halliburton was on the trade market to begin with. So I was very confused at first when I saw Halliburton's name out there and traded for a player like Sabonis. Yeah, for a player such as Sabonis, when other teams were saying, well, if I knew that Halliburton was out there, I would have given you more. What I find more interesting is teams are saying we only had to give up Domantas Sabonis along with a few other players for Halliburton. People forget that Sabonis is a very, very good player. He's one of the best players when it comes to rebounding the basketball this season. So I think it was an even trade for the most part. Obviously, I think Halliburton is going to prove it's tough because Halliburton and Sabonis are just different players, and they're both very, very good. I was just surprised, though, personally, when I saw Halliburton even on the trade market to begin with, because that's one of those young assets that you normally don't move on from, especially when you're playing him alongside someone like De'Aaron Fox. You thought you had two pieces to build around, but instead the Sacramento Kings basically saw De'Aaron Fox and the opportunity to build around him, and I think they did a good job. I mean, that was a good win by the Sacramento Kings, but it'll be interesting to see where they go from there.
I think a lot of the reaction, at least in terms of NBA Twitter, which is where I find most of my news and where I kind of hang out most of my time. Go follow us. Our ats are down there. But essentially, you look at this guy as Tyrese Halliburton, and NBA nerds love Tyrese Halliburton because he's efficient. He knows what to do with the basketball. He doesn't turn it over. He's averaging like 19 and 7 when he has the control of the ball. Last couple of nights when De'Aaron Fox hasn't been playing as well as he needed to, Tyrese Halliburton's had to carry the load on the offense. And I was listening to podcasts the other day, and they brought up this point that when Tyrese Halliburton is the focus of their offense, he's averaging over 90 touches a game. And now you think to yourself, well, how much is that compared to other players? Most of the NBA, when they're Luka Doncic's of the world, the James Hardens of the world, those guys are getting around 100 or so a game. And that's just like times they touch the ball. So Tyrese Halliburton, although he still is leading one of the higher touches players in the league, he doesn't average the amount of shot attempts that you would think because he's able to fit into that flow of the offense so well. The issue being is that for the Sacramento Kings, they had such a log jam at point guard and at shooting guard that they had to basically make a decision. Are we going to take Tyrese Halliburton, who might be a third or possibly second best player on a playoff team in 3-4 years? Or do we want to give what our fans need, which is playoff experience or playoff appearance, just getting there essentially to their fans? And so when they picked Sabonis, I was a little bit shocked, especially considering that how Tyrese Halliburton is viewed around the league. And you said it. I wonder what teams would have traded for him or given the Kings something else for him, considering that he essentially no one knew he was going to be traded. So I wonder what the Kings, if they maybe shot their shot a little bit too early with just taking Sabonis. Not that he's not a good player. He's a great player. But I wonder what more they could have gotten for him, especially with how many teams were looking to improve at the deadline this year. There's a quote from Indiana Pacers coach Rick Carlisle. It's an exciting trade and it changes the landscape significantly, said Carlisle, who described Halliburton as an elite young point guard that affects the game positively in many, many ways. We're getting 3 players who are good now, and in the case of Tyrese, he has a chance to continue to grow. Finding a franchise caliber point guard at age 21 is extremely difficult to do. And I bring that up because I think we underestimate just in general how much Rick Carlisle might have been important in getting Tyrese Halliburton. I don't think that trade gets done if the Kings are only offering De'Aaron Fox. That is not the kind of player that Rick Carlisle likes building around, likes playing around. So I wonder how much of that was less of the Pacers wanting to get rid of Sabonis and the but the Pacers wanting Tyrese Halliburton, how much that was the Kings just really wanting Domantas Sabonis and doing anything they could to get him. And that might even be getting rid of their 21-year-old future. I don't want to say he's going to be a future all-star, but there are a lot of people that do think that. So I'm not ready to predict that yet. The Western Conference guards are always absolutely stacked, and he's got to get through some stuff before he can get to that level of respect. But I wonder how much of this was actually just Rick Carlisle kind of pushing that narrative of wanting, or the Kings pushing the narrative of wanting Domantas Sabonis, and not just the Pacers being like, oh yeah, we're getting rid of him right now. I wonder. I know we're not in those rooms. It would be awesome, but like we'll find out in a couple of years maybe what actually went down behind the scenes, especially if Tyrese Halliburton trends upwards the way that we think he might be leaning to. We're almost about 2 hours into this point, and for some reason, I am still super energized. It might be this giant soda next to me and the Pringles I've been
Yeah.
eating this whole time.
So
Is there anything that you had wanted to talk about in terms of this trade landscape? Because there's a lot of things that went down
yeah,
that we haven't really talked about. There was a 4-team trade that happened earlier today.
yeah, yep.
Um, you can go on our NBA trade tracker
So
on the athleteshub.org to look at that. But yeah, you got anything for me?
So just some cleanup things here in the trade deadline as we continue. Like I said, I mean, Gary and I have put in a lot of work towards this tracker. We're also updating it as teams are monitoring the buyout market. Players are beginning to be waived to open up roster spots. The Toronto Raptors waive Drew Eubanks off of their roster. The Houston Rockets are going to be waiving both DJ Augustine and Ormani Brooks. And then also a report has come out that prior to the close of the deadline, the Los Angeles Lakers and the Houston Rockets were potentially discussing a deal that would send Russell Westbrook, Talen Horton-Tucker, and their 2027 first-round pick to the Houston Rockets, and it would have been in exchange for John Wall and Christian Wood would have came back to the Los Angeles Lakers. It seemed too good to be true at that point. But yeah, Gary, I mean, you mentioned a lot of really good points. There's a lot of different trades that have been just overshadowed completely by the James Harden news, by the CJ McCollum news from a couple of days ago, the Kristaps Porzingis news from today. A lot of these trades are just really, really interesting. One that I think is a little bit overlooked is the trade that happened a couple of days ago with Caris LeVert. He had the opportunity to play for the Cleveland Cavaliers in their win against the San Antonio Spurs. He ended up finishing with, I believe it was 11 points and a couple of rebounds, and he shot 4 of 11 from the field. Not, lights out. It's not something that's going to catch your eye and say, hey, he's a superstar. But, I mean, his last game with the Indiana Pacers, he went off for 42 points in that game. So he has some momentum going into his time with Cleveland. I got to watch a little bit of that game. He gets the standing ovation from the Cleveland Cavaliers fans, and he's just one of those players, man, where he can make a real difference in Cleveland. They've been missing some three-point shooting, some shooting from the perimeter. Their primary strengths include, Mobley and Jared Allen from the inside, as well as Darius Garland, his ability to move around the court so efficiently. But Caris LeVert, I think he's going to make a real difference for the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah, that Cleveland team, although he there's a lot of people that are saying like, yeah, he's a good player, but what really does he do for your team if you have I know the Cavaliers aren't there yet, especially now with the upgraded parts in the East. But there's a lot of people that think in a couple of years with this Darius Garland, Jared Allen tandem, Kevin Love doing a lot this year. That's good for them. Colin Sexton possibly coming back next season and having a great impact on this team. You got a bunch of good players around them. We just need a guy who can create his own shot. And that's what Caris LeVert does. He is he's good off the bounce. He's good off the catch. He can do what he wants on that end of the court. They've got the defenders around them to kind of mitigate his struggles on that end of the floor. But I like this trade for the Cavs just on the aspect of they're willing to go out and get better. They're willing to go out and get better because they understand that, hey, this season is the first time in a long time that we've been able to convince our fans that we are doing something without LeBron James. 2003 was the last time LeBron wasn't a topic of conversation in Cleveland. And even when he's been on the Lakers, it's always been, wow, look at this Cavs team. You know who they'd be better with? LeBron James. And when he left, they were kind of in this weird turmoil of not being able to be good enough and getting really high draft picks. And it seemed like it would be the same thing that happened when he left to go to Miami. But they've turned it around. And when they go out and make trades like this for Caris LeVert, it really shows to me that this team can actually show its fans and show the teammates around them, Colin Sexton, Darius Garland, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley. We are willing to go out and win games because we believe in you. And I think that means more than whatever Caris LeVert does on the court, which I assume is going to be actually good basketball. He is a good basketball player. And once again, that's my incredible analysis. Yeah, he's good. Moving on. But yeah, he is going to show this Cavs team the offensive production they need to be a serious playoff player. Not that they're going to contend for the title, but if the dominoes fall correctly and Karis LeVert has a couple of big games along with the defensive ability of Mobley, the offensive explosion that Darius Garland can provide, there's not a bone in my body that doesn't say that they get to the first round of the playoffs and surprise a team, especially if they can stay this high in the standings this year. I believe they're third or fourth in the East at the moment. I'm not quite sure if that's true. Let me look that up before I start spouting some nonsense. East standings. Here we go. NBA. They're fourth. Yeah, I was right. They're fourth in the East. So right now, wow, they'd be playing the 76ers. I might have to take what I said back. But, you know, the idea that the 76ers probably vault them in the standings just based off of talent alone, depending on how long it takes to gel there. They're only a game and a half back from the 76ers in the standing, or a game and a half ahead of the 76ers in the standings. So depending on their matchup, this Karis LeVert acquisition could mean the difference between a first-round exit and a surprising second-round entrance for the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cavs also getting rid of Ricky Rubio's expiring deal in the trade, and the Pacers getting some draft compensation back. Yeah, I like this Karis LeVert trade for the Cavs just on the sense of they're giving their younger players a reason to expect to stay in Cleveland for longer than they might want to, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, so let me ask you this, sort of on a different note, because one player who was sort of rumored to get bought out, but he hasn't been bought out officially yet, is Goran Dragic. And I know the Mavericks have been talking about being the favorites. The Bucks have been implementing themselves into the situation. Where do you sort of see Goran Dragic landing as his best landing spot right now? Because he's a veteran presence that could really help any team that he's a part of. I know his contract right now isn't very team friendly, but I mean, he's definitely an asset to any sort of contender.
Oh yeah, he only played 5 games this year. Not really the stats you want, and you could also look at that as sort of a he really doesn't wanted to try. I mean,
right.
I like I said earlier in this podcast, Dragic. I like Dragic as a player. He did a lot for our Miami Heat team when we went to the finals in the bubble, but he did a little bit of a unprofessional move this season with the way he treated the Raptors. So if he gets bought out from them, knowing his Slovenian ties and how much of a good relationship he has with Luka Doncic, I and pretty much everyone around the league is expecting him to sign with the Dallas Mavericks. A couple other teams that are in consideration are the Milwaukee Bucks, the Chicago Bulls, and the Los Angeles Clippers. I don't see him signing with the Clippers just based on the fact that, knowing him at 35 years old, he probably wants to go for a team that's going to contend or go play with Luka. And, you know, while Luka Doncic and the Mavs might not be the favorites to win the title, they are definitely a couple of playoff series where Luka goes absolutely bonkers to making some sort of deep playoff run. And especially the relationship they have, I probably see him signing with the Mavericks. But yeah, just so that there's a lot of people that are out there thinking to themselves, well, why doesn't he sign with the Heat? Because he was traded with the Kyle Lowry acquisition at the beginning of this season. He cannot officially sign with the Heat until after the 2022 season, like legally. Like, I hate to be like, oh, he can't just because, like, yeah, no, legally they are not allowed to acquire him. And even if he's bought out, they cannot accept his rights. The NBA has rules and restrictions against that, so that you can't just trade away a guy, he gets bought out, and then you sign him back for a small deal. You know, that's how rules work. And so as many Miami Heat games as he's showing up to show support for his team. And I don't know if you saw it the other day, but you probably didn't, because, you know, I'm following every single beat reporter on the Heat. There was a couple of pictures that came out of a couple of players, one of them being Victor Oladipo, getting playing in practice, just a couple of practice shots. They're wearing their warm-ups, whatever. And you look, and there's a dude on the court guarding Victor Oladipo who looks just like Goran Dragic, and everyone's like, is he in Miami? Oh, my God, that's not allowed. That looks terrible. And it wound up just being their strength and conditioning coach. But I thought it was really funny that everyone was freaking out about it. He can't do that. He can't go over there. And if he does, then that's a bigger problem. I don't even think the Mavericks would want him in that respect, because he might not even be able to play based on breaking rules and everything like that.
Right.
I don't think, in my knowledge, that's ever happened, but it would, just for storyline's sake, it'd be kind of fun. But I honestly, with Goran Dragic, he's going to bring some veteran presence to whatever team he's on. He's going to bring scoring. That's his bread and butter, getting in the basket. And if there's one thing the Knicks need, is a guy who can drive in the paint, because they do tend to rely a lot on 3-point shots. And if Goran Dragic can get in there coming off the bench, get the ball and score some baskets, so Luka Doncic can get a little bit of rest, while it's not going to be what he was at the level in Miami, considering his age and the lack of playing in the last couple of years. We got a man coming.
Oh, no. We're in trouble now.
Man, we're going to stop the Goran Dragic talk right now to talk to my man Isaiah Hansen. Earlier today, he expressed to me in a multitude of messages and tweets about how much he wants a lot of players to be dealt, getting rid of, and we're here for you, Isaiah. Adrian Wojnarowski tweeted that the Knicks aren't going to be pursuing anybody at the trade deadline. I'm going to give the floor to you, just so that you can vent a little bit. This is officially a therapy session now that you're here. You and Devin, we can talk all we want about everything that y'all went through today, but just know we love you. We're here for you. And we're only doing this because we want you to feel better.
Let me just say something. Dev, if I could give you like a hug, I would, just so you know. I feel this, okay? And look, I actually feel the Lakers thing too, because like I said, my consolation prize for the Knicks not doing anything would have been Carmelo Anthony getting his first ring. That's not going to happen. I don't even know where to start, right? First, I want to start with blaming something, right? I don't know who to blame, so I'm going to start with myself. I'm going to blame myself. Let me tell you something. Look, I was just trying to put together, like as I was working, trying to put together like a little timeline of the disappointments of being a Knicks fan, dating back all the way back to 2010, when we were hearing rumblings about potentially landing LeBron James and all this stuff, and we wound up with Stat, right? Wasn't the worst thing in the world, but like I kind of took it. I said, okay, Stat's good. Then we got the roster. We get Carmelo. I still was okay with it. 2011, we did all that, and we got swept by Boston in the first round, right? 2012, we got gentlemen swept by Miami. Okay, but it was LeBron James. Okay, so understood. 2013, you had the Linsanity, probably the best year of being a Knicks fan in my lifetime, and we made it to the second round. We got eliminated by the Pacers with Roy Hibbert. 2014, Andrea Bargnani. I'm not saying nothing else. 2015, we get Kristaps Porzingis. We pair him with Follow, Cleanthony Early, and we signed Joakim Noah to a 4-year, what was it, 72, 82, whatever. I don't even care, man. Phil Jackson era starts also, by the way.
And the first move Phil Jackson makes as the executive of the New York Knicks is to sign Lamar Odom.
Lamar Odom.
Stephen A. I'm not going to say it, but you all know. Go look at the clip. Go look up the Stephen A. thing.
And if that wasn't a sign of things to come, then nothing was. Let me tell. Okay, so Phil Jackson created an era of hope with Kristaps Porzingis and Melo, and destroyed it all in the same tenure. It was only like 2 years too. It wasn't even like it wasn't. So then the Frank Ntilikina era starts. I'm not gonna come down on him. I mean, who is supposed to be responsible for turning this franchise around? Definitely not him. We hear rumblings about getting Zion Williamson. We have the worst record And then the league changes like the odds when it came to the lottery picks and the top 3. So we get our 3rd pick. We miss out on Zion. I guess that was a blessing in disguise. But who knows? Maybe he would have been more motivated in New York. But anyway, besides the point, we miss on John Morant. We get RJ Barrett. Not ashamed whatsoever. RJ Barrett is the man. He still is. He's the only reason why to watch the Knicks anymore this year. That's it. Nothing else. Okay? Then we miss on KD and Kyrie. I don't know if that was a blessing or not. And we get Julius Randle. We start a new era. We get Tibbs. We start and we do well. We have, a little bit of hope last year, and it's crushed again. Do you notice the pattern? The pattern. We get a little bit of hope, crashes down. Little bit of hope, crashes down. And it's not like, like there's some teams that, they're 5 years. Like even the Lakers, look, they've been trying to do this thing with LeBron and AD. It's been like 5 years. No, the Knicks is like 2 and done. 2 years and you're done. Nothing else. And I blame myself. I should have seen it coming. The Knicks have done everything in their power to tell me that this was coming throughout the years. But I still believe those rumor mills. I'm done with rumor mills, by the way. Any group that I'm in that's like trade rumors, I'm unfollowing. I'm leaving. I don't want nothing to do with these rumors because I'm done with it. I don't want to hear no more. I want to see. How do you not trade Mitchell Robinson? How do you let him walk for nothing? And I heard you talking earlier. You go from James Harden talking Mitchell Robinson. But
I made the turn of the century with that one. But
Yeah.
I do remember, Isaiah, I have a picture that I'd like to show you. I know you went to a Knicks game a couple of weeks back, so we got a photo right here just to show you. This is Isaiah at the game, looking good though.
Yeah, it is.
The bag over the head, you look great, man. I gotta say.
Thank you, man. Number 3 for AI.
Yeah, Isaiah, I want to ask you this because this was the closest I think that the Knicks were going to get to a trade, and I had mentioned it earlier today in a group chat that we're both a part of. And I pulled up the trade that way I don't forget this time because Gary and I were talking about this earlier. The 3-team trade of the Lakers, Knicks, and Raptors. It would have sent Cam Reddish and Alec Burks to the Lakers. The Knicks would have had Goran Dragic and more draft capital, and the Raptors would have gotten Taylor Horton-Tucker and Nerlens Noel. I think that would have been a big L for the Knicks in that trade. Are you happier just with no trade at all, or would you rather have a losing trade like that one?
I don't know. To be honest. But like that trade, if it would have happened, I guess I would have been complaining about that just as bad as I am now about nothing happening. Just because you know what the Knicks feel like? I know you guys do some fantasy. Well, I know Dev does like fantasy sports once in a while. It's like having that one guy in the group chat that doesn't really trade often. So whenever he sends you a proposal, you don't really like pay too much mind to it. And you end up dealing the guy he was interested in to somebody else. That's what the Knicks feel like. I don't think the teams take the Knicks seriously. I mean, how could they, right? But with that Dragic trade, if that would have happened, like I said, we would have just be getting bullied at that point. So we get Cam Reddish, a nice young player with a promising future, I believe anyway. Who's gonna know? He's been benched the past 5 or 6 games. But and we get Dragic in draft compensation. like if God forbid that draft compensation wasn't a first rounder, man. I mean, you guys gotta at least take Evan Fournier if we're doing that deal. Like you gotta give us something. So I guess I'm glad that didn't happen, but what did the Knicks do? I mean, am I supposed to believe they were on their phone calls? Like, were they calling anybody? What were they doing?
And here's the list of players too that because they just came out. Real GM, the notable players traded at the 2022 NBA trade deadline. This is the list: James Harden, Ben Simmons, Domantas Sabonis, Tyrese Halliburton, CJ McCollum, Kristaps Porzingis, Spencer Dinwiddie, Seth Curry, Derek White, Norman Powell, Caris LeVert, Larry Nance Jr., Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Not a single one of those players land in 2 of the biggest markets in the NBA in New York or Los Angeles. I'm right there. I feel your pain, man. And it's an absolutely wash of a season.
Look, let me tell you something. You do not feel my pain. Let me tell you something.
Mm-hmm.
Like you may feel like today's pain, but my pain is going back like championships. How about like 3rd round? Like we haven't even done anything notable. All I've had is hope and getting crashed down. I'd rather us just be a bottom of the Bills franchise for the rest of like stop this giving me hope and then crushing me again. Like, I'm done with it. The only reason why to watch the Knicks anymore is RJ Barrett. That's it. No other reason.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Isaiah, but the other day I was really concerned for you. I was thinking to myself about the John Starks missing all those shots in the finals in New York. And I thought about you a lot because I wanted to reach out and express to you that I understand your pain. Although I am a Miami Heat fan, I am also a Miami Dolphins fan. And we know what it's like not to win from 1970. So I do want to say to you that no, go for it, because we haven't won a playoff game since 2000. So what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, okay, you know what it's like to be a Miami Dolphins fan, but do you know what it's like to be a Knicks and a Jets fan? You know what that's like?
I mean, you went to the West. You went to the, what is it called? The AFC Championship.
You had Mark Sanchez for.
Oh yeah.
Come on, the man himself. No, New York sports. I send my condolences.
Yeah, you had Mr. Butt Fumble.
That's what happens when you get the Yankees. You have to deal with it.
I guess so, but I miss Mr. Butt Fumble, man. At this point, like at least we were relevant at the time. We had LT. Bring back Jericho Cottrell, man. I miss that guy.
Oh wow, that's a name I haven't heard in a while.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite wide receivers growing up, man. I remember him tearing his hamstring and still going and making a catch, man. That's like the highlight of my Jets fandom. It's just
carry the team on his back.
Literally. Right to
I feel for you, man. As a Knicks fan, I know it's hard, and especially even harder knowing they didn't do anything this deadline, especially and also with you, Dev, with your Lakers. I haven't been as expressive as I would like to be about my team this year because of y'all's disappointment. We talked about this earlier. I just want to know for both of you, I'm here for you. My messages are always open. I'm here. I don't know what else to say. Like, guys, this good times are coming. Don't worry. I believe in both of your teams. I believe in Leon Rose. What do you got? What do you got your notes there? You're just crumpling them up. Yep, there you go. Dang. He said nope. He said I'm out. Clip that. All right, guys, we're about 2 hours, 10 minutes into this thing. We're gonna be going live until for about another 30 minutes. We still got a couple of trades we didn't talk about today. We got a 4-way trade with the Kings, the Bucks, the Pistons, and the Clippers. Now, this doesn't really move the needle as much as a lot of people would like for these teams, but the Sacramento Kings are acquiring Josh Jackson, Trey Lyles, and Dante DiVincenzo. The Milwaukee Bucks are acquiring Serge Ibaka and 2 future second-round picks, and the Clippers are acquiring Semi Ojeleye, Rodney Hood, and the Detroit Pistons are getting Marvin Bagley III. As a first reaction, Devin, what are you thinking about this trade other than, in my opinion, just Serge Ibaka being the only real person that matters, especially when you're talking about contenders?
Yeah, so before I head off in the next couple of minutes, this will sort of be my last take right here. Really interesting trade because you don't normally get a 4-team trade in the NBA. It's extremely rare, especially when you're in crunch time towards the trade deadline. You're focused on moving other players. You're focused on whether you're going to be buyers or sellers. Like you said, Serge Ibaka is really the only player that really mattered. I was surprised that the Milwaukee Bucks were as active in the trade deadline, especially they came across more like sellers, especially with Dante DiVincenzo, who was a college stud, by the way. I remember seeing him play in college, but they're giving up a little bit of depth in return for future draft compensation, the 2 future second-round picks. So I was a little surprised by that. And they also gave up Ojeleye. They gave up Rodney Hood. So it was a confusing trade for the Bucks. I didn't really necessarily like that take from them. For everybody else involved, they're coming across as teams that are rebuilding towards their future. The Sacramento Kings, like we talked about before, Gary, they're a team that is actually playing to win right now, get themselves into that play-in tournament and make a little bit of noise. The Detroit Pistons basically kicked over the season. The Los Angeles Clippers without Kawhi Leonard or Paul George are not going to be useful whatsoever in a playoff picture. Technically, they're in the play-in tournament right now. They should fall out by the time the season ends. But overall, I like the trade for everybody except for the Bucks in that situation.
Yeah, I think it is weird that the Bucks decided to punt on a lot of their bench depth just to get a guy in Serge Ibaka who, quite honestly hasn't played in like 2 years, at least meaningful basketball in 2 years. I know he's gotten a little bit of injuries he's had to deal with. He's getting a little bit up there in age. I wonder if the Bucks are acquiring Serge Ibaka, or if the 2 first-round or the 2 second-round picks were the more if those were the actual centerpieces of the trade and Serge Ibaka was just in there for salary filler. I don't know how much playing time he's going to get. That being said, I know Brook Lopez has had a little bit of injuries this season, so I wouldn't be surprised if Serge Ibaka, given Brook Lopez's health, plays some significant minutes, at least 10, 15 a game off the bench just to fill those center lineups. If there's anything you want to talk about before you go, Dev, we got some Lakers not doing anything at the deadline. Is there anything you want to add before you head out of here? I know you got to go.
My final take, we reiterated this before, highly disappointed in my Los Angeles Lakers, a team that should have been extremely active at the trade deadline, failed to do so. And not in the good way either. Other teams that were inactive at the trade deadline include the Chicago Bulls, but don't get yourself confused because the Chicago Bulls are among the elite teams in the NBA, whereas I would be surprised if the play-in tournament started today, the Lakers would be playing against the Clippers. I'm telling you right now, I might just bet on the Clippers without Paul George and without Kawhi Leonard to beat up the Los Angeles Lakers. This is a team that I watched last night that lost to a JV basketball team in the Portland Trailblazers that were without Damian Lillard, that were without CJ McCollum. And I saw the craziest thing. And I almost tweeted this last night, but I had to go to sleep and make sure I wasn't dreaming. And I had to pinch myself the next morning. I saw Yusuf Nurkic outplay Anthony Davis for a full game of basketball. Anthony Davis, people want to blame LeBron James. People want to blame Russell Westbrook. People want to blame the age. People want to blame Frank Vogel. Anthony Davis, you are not the future of my franchise.
Wow.
That's all I have to say on that.
Who is?
All right.
Do they have a future?
Yeah.
I'll tell you,
Taylor Horton Tucker.
I'll tell you who the future is. This Los Angeles Lakers team has been protecting this 2027 first-round pick like it's their firstborn child. Whoever gets drafted with that first-round pick better have the craziest aspirations in the whole entire world. That's the future of our franchise. That's the reason we couldn't get a trade done, apparently, is because of a first-round pick 5 years down the road. So I hope that it comes worth it 5 years from now when half your fan base is already out the window.
There's an 8th grader right now whose boots are shaking.
I was just going to say that.
There's an 8th grader right now who's over here like, yeah, I guess I'll be on the Lakers. Like he's got the, he hasn't hit puberty yet. He's 6'1". He'll probably be like 6'8" in 2 years. But but Dev.
Yep.
I know you got to head out.
Great job today, Gary. Great job, Isaiah. I'm interested to hear what else you guys have to take on there, and good luck to everybody. All right.
Of course. Thank you for joining us, man. All right. Dev's out. I got Isaiah here. We're about 2 hours, 15 minutes into the show right now. We've covered a bunch of Knicks stuff. We covered a bunch of Lakers stuff. We covered the James Harden and Ben Simmons trade, which, Isaiah, I haven't gotten to ask you about. I think it would be a good idea to end this show on that part of the pod. We went over a bunch of stuff. I haven't gotten your opinion. One thing I do want to mention, though, just in terms of news for the NBA trade deadline this year, just in general, the NBA news, Patrick Williams is apparently supposed to come back this year, which could mean a lot for the Bulls. I just quickly on that, they did not trade him this trade deadline. A lot of people thought that they might be in talks with the Detroit Pistons for Jeremy Grant. That did not happen. The Bulls are betting on their young forward, who had a lot of promise defensively, creating his own shot a little bit. And with this new Bulls team around DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, Lonzo Ball, Vucevic, that fifth guy that you need to play defense, they've been filling it in with Javonte Green every now and then. Ayo Dosunmu's been getting some playing time with a bunch of people injured and out. I'm hopeful to see Patrick Williams play some good basketball this year. But going past that, what are your opinions on the Ben Simmons, James Harden deal? Because that broke the internet for a little bit. My Twitter wasn't loading.
If I could take my Knick fan hat off for a minute, It's not easy to do, by the way. It's going to be really hard to get that.
It's a really heavy hat.
Yeah, it's really hard. But for a minute, I really like the trade on both sides. I saw a lot of people coming after Philly for they did give up a little bit, some depth there. But you know what? Sometimes you just got to roll the dice, man. Like the way it is. I mean, I know they traded Ben Simmons, but essentially they traded Seth Curry, Drummond, and who was the other guy? I'm sorry.
It was Seth Curry, Drummond, and I believe that was it. It was just Seth Curry. I'm so bad at my
I thought
job.
there was one more guy, but
let me look. While you keep talking, I'll look at it.
Yeah, either way, because Ben Simmons was not going to play for them, so you had to get somebody, and who better to get than James Harden, right? Like, I mean, you're going to have a hard time doing a lot better than that. Him paired with Embiid is just really fun. In fact, I think the 76ers might be closer to an NBA ring than the Brooklyn Nets are at this juncture. They did sacrifice their future, of course, but that future was gone anyway through Ben Simmons. So, and on the other side, with the Nets, you just set yourself up. Like I said earlier in the chat, they addressed all their needs really in like one trade, and that's how you get things done.
Just to recap, it's Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and 2 first-round picks for Ben Simmons and Paul Millsap. So, of course, you've got the Nets getting a lot of players and some first-round picks for Ben Simmons, and the Sixers getting back James Harden in the deal. You were correct in your assessment, in my opinion. The Nets solved every one of their problems with one trade. And I don't think that can be said for a lot of teams this season and in general for most teams in the entire NBA history. It's very rare that you get like one trade and it solves all your problems. And the Nets did that. And I think in some ways, the Sixers did a really good job of doing that too. Yes, they sacrificed a little bit of their bench depth. But when you talk about how to win championships, the goal is to get as many top 10 players as you can. And at his best, James Harden is an MVP candidate in this league. And we forget that because of the temper tantrums he throws on certain teams. He's wanted out of the Rockets. He wants out of the Nets. And now he's on the Sixers. He gets his wish. He's with his buddy, Daryl Morey, who has a love affair with the guy. We know this, but going back to the Rockets, he wasn't going to trade that guy for LeBron James, Kevin Durant. James Harden was his guy, and he gets him back. Who would you take in a 7-game series? Devin asked me this question the other couple hours ago, but you got the starting five of off the top of my head, let's do this. James Harden, Tyrese Maxey, Danny Green, Tobias Harris, and Joel Embiid versus a lineup of Kyrie Irving. You've got Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving. Then you're probably either getting Joe Harris or Seth Curry, Kevin Durant, and Andre Drummond, depending on who they decide to start, Andre Drummond or LaMarcus Aldridge. I think it'd be smart if they started Drummond just for defensive and rebounding issues. What are your takes on that?
It's something, man, because I think the trade itself moves the needle higher for the 76ers, in my opinion. But hearing those names, if Kyrie's going to play every game, which who knows? And by the way, do we know is Ben Simmons going to play every game? We don't know, his vaccination status as well.
That's true. I'm not sure that we actually do know that because I would assume that if he's getting traded to the Brooklyn Nets, knowing how much of an issue that they have with Kyrie in that regard, I would assume that he is, just based off of, I don't think they do that trade if he's not,
Right.
Like, I don't think the Nets do that trade if they are concerned that Ben Simmons might not even be able to play home games. So I think just based off, if it does come out that he is not and he can't play the home games, we're going to look at this trade a whole lot differently when that information comes out. I would assume he is. I'm not going to go on and their NBA front offices are a lot smarter than me and you. Just correct. they got like master's degrees and doctors and stuff like that. Oh, that's true. Not true.
Mine.
Not your next. Oh, buddy. But yeah, no, I'd assume that he is. So let's just go off of the basis that he is playing every single game. If is this your new Western Conference or Eastern Conference Finals matchup? Off the top of your head.
Cool. I'm going down with the ship with the Bucks. I'm still gonna go down with the ship. I'm gonna hang on. but I'm definitely not as sure as I was. I was sure it was going to be the Bucks in the finals. I was sure. Now it's a ball game. It's a ball game. We got a ball game. If the Bucks could stay healthy, I think I still roll with them ever so slightly. But if Ben Simmons comes in there and he improves and he's the Ben Simmons we knew, God forbid he gets he comes in shooting threes or shooting a mid range.
Okay, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't give fans hope. I doubt he's gonna shoot any threes.
Oh, I want to give fans hope. I want them to be crushed just like I am.
You want to give fans hope? What a sadistic man! You're over here like, yeah, it'll be amazing. Don't worry about it. And then secretly, like Mr. Burns in it with your hands, like, yes, excellent.
I mean, I don't know though. You never know. Ben Simmons, like you see him in these off season, like he's draining threes from the logo at times. Like, how are you gonna tell me that you can't like shoot a mid range in a game? Maybe it was the coaching. Who knows what it was? But I believe playing with Kevin Durant, Kyrie, like these guys are gonna encourage him, and they're gonna oh my God, if there is not a perfect teammate for Ben Simmons other than Kyrie Irving, you talk about two guys in like similar predicaments like this season. Remember early on, we were like, hey, they might get traded for each other. They belong with each other right now. Like they both going through similar things. Ben Simmons might be a little bit worse, with the 76ers situation, but perfect teammate. And then Kevin Durant always supports his guys. I would not be shocked if Ben Simmons comes in there with a mid-range shot. I would not be shocked. And if that happens, I hate to say it, but if he starts shooting, we got an NBA Finals winners right here. Brooklyn Nets.
Isaiah, if Ben Simmons starts shooting, I have a beach house in Idaho I can sell you.
I got to make it at least a few mid-range shots. I got to make it a few.
Okay. I hope just in general as a basketball fan that he does because, Kevin O'Connor, a reporter for the Ringer, loves to say that he doesn't shoot with the right hand, which I think is a little overblown just because he's a professional athlete. I think he probably knows which hand he's shooting with. There is it's funny to talk about, he doesn't even shoot with the right hand, because he doesn't shoot so well. I think that's funny. But the thing I worry about with Brooklyn, especially with the introduction of Ben Simmons, you've got Kyrie Irving there, you've got Kevin Durant there. We know that it probably will work on the court. My question to you is that you've seen teams in the past. We've seen teams in the past, especially as NBA fans, who they have all the talent they can put together on the court, but off the court, it doesn't work. And I mean that in the way that you've got three guys who are a little bit more, I want to be careful with my words here because I don't want to offend anybody because it would be rude to, but you have three testy individuals, guys who are a little bit prone to going off the rails just a little bit because they're very opinionated. They know what they want. They have their own belief systems. And there's a lot of players who are willing to put that behind them. And those three guys are a lot more prideful than a lot of other NBA players, just in terms of their public opinions and all of that. So I worry. You see this with the Lakers and I know Dev's gone, so I'm going to say it. The 2012 Lakers with Kobe Bryant, Dwight Howard, Steve Nash. While they couldn't stay healthy, a lot of their issues stemmed from the relationship between Kobe Bryant and Dwight Howard. Pau Gasol. Those guys didn't really gel. Of course, Kobe and Pau have their chemistry. But when you add a guy like Dwight Howard in there who demands the ball as much as he does, wants to be involved in the offense as much as he did, and doesn't really show the production, it can get a little bit of it can be a little bit of a testing environment. And I just hope in general that the team works in that way. Do you see anything happen in this way? I know you got to go here soon.
I don't see it with the Nets for some reason this year. I think Harden was the only one that not that it's bad. I don't blame Harden, by the way. I think he was the only one that was like fed up with the Kyrie situation, and but KD, he's always vouched for Kyrie, and Kyrie's just he doesn't really have much to say. Like they've been going ham for him, Kyrie, and Ben Simmons, same guy. Like I think. I mean, what room does he have to complain now? Like you're in this situation.
Yeah, he got what he wanted. He literally got exactly what he wanted. He got traded to a contender. He's gonna be playing. He doesn't have to move very far. I know Philadelphia and New York are only a 2-hour drive.
Yeah,
I'll be making that drive in April. Like that's it's not like he's got much to complain about in that regard.
Yep. And
Yeah.
I think that's what's scariest about the Nets. Oh God, that's what's scariest about the Nets is like I don't see them really like. I think these are the three perfect teammates right now, based off their situation. I mean, not really KD's situation, but just how KD is in general. I think he's just. You want to talk about a leader, man. I don't think Kevin Durant gets enough credit for being a leader. I mean, I know a lot of people came after him like, oh, you should talk to Kyrie, but he's not going to make that decision for him. And he's been vouching for his guys every single interview. And by the way, like KD makes that whole franchise move, so
Yeah.
that's something I just want to, you got to mention that too. I think he's in a perfect spot, perfect place right now.
Yeah, I honestly do think you're right. I think Ben Simmons, in all of his flaws offensively, he brings it on the defensive level, and from just a play style point of view, the pairing of him and Kevin Durant. And I do want to mention Kevin Durant's a very good defender. I know he gets more credit as an offensive player, but his time in Golden State and his impact on that side of the ball really came to light when he was playing for them. At times, he was the second best defender. Of course, you got Draymond Green on the court, so you're never going to be like the best. But at times, Kevin Durant was the second best defender on that team with a team with Klay Thompson. So that's a guy with Ben Simmons who can make up for those mistakes that Kyrie Irving could possibly make on that end of the court. I know you got to go here soon. Thank you for coming on and letting us rip you a little bit, because I know you had a lot to say. You gave us a little bit of a Knicks timeline of some disappointment. Is there anything you want to say before you head off? I'm gonna do this for about another 10 minutes, and then what do you got to say, my man?
Let me get the positive thing. Okay, let me get the positives. Look, Gary.
And on a positive, good idea.
Gary is the one that put this. Well, this was his idea, and I think it's very good. He did a very good job. I was listening the whole time at work, by the way, even when I was.
Hey, thank you.
So you guys were doing a great job, and I'm gonna still watch and see what you got to bring to us, because Gary always has I think Gary's the one guy that could go on a stream for no preparation, no nothing. Hey, talk about the NBA for 2 hours, please, and give us relevant conversations. And he's that guy. So, great job.
Thanks, man.
If there's any Knicks fans watching this, it's your fault too. And I didn't even mention Linsanity with the timeline, by the way. I didn't even mention that.
No, you did. You did. You said that was the most. You said that was the best season you've seen in your. I don't want to say in your life. I don't think you said that, but you did mention Linsanity in your life. Yeah, you think?
I mean, in my consciousness and watching the NBA with interest, that would be.
Because you were a little bit too young to watch the Knicks with Patrick Ewing and everything like that. That's the same way I feel with the Heat. Is I loved the Heat when 06 when we won the title. I'd love to say that I watched every single game, but I was 7. So It's really hard for me to be I liked Shaq and Dwayne Wade because I had Shaq's shoes, and I watched the grainy footage on TV, and my dad gave me a Heat hat when I was 6. So I liked the team, but I didn't start really watching that team until sadly Michael Beasley was drafted. So and a little bit about Michael Beasley. He had a couple of stints in New York.
He's not an analysis, just remember that.
No, he's only using 10% of his brain.
Yeah. I don't know.
You've seen that clip, right?
I'm your favorite player's favorite player.
It's true. It's true.
I remember those interviews. Oh boy.
All right, man. I'll let you get back to what you're doing. I'm gonna be on for about another 10 minutes. See you later, man. Have a good day.
Buddy.
Oh, you're still here. All right, cool. That was Devin. That was Isaiah. We've been going for 2.5 hours at this point. NBA trade deadline. Let's do a little bit of a summary. Well, a lot of things happened. We got Ben Simmons and James Harden actually getting traded for one another, which if you told me a year ago, I wouldn't have believed you, just because of, the amount that Brooklyn took to get James Harden, the amount of effort that they took. It was just an incredible trade from both sides, just in terms of the ability to actually have it happen. I want to go through a couple of teams a little bit, just to recap of what we've got going. We got the Boston Celtics trading a couple of players we got Romeo Langford, Josh Richardson going, and a first-round pick to the Spurs for Derek White. Personally, my opinion. I think that's a little bit of an overpay. While Derek White is a very good player, I do think that the package of 2 players and a first-round pick might have been a little bit of an overpay for the guard. I mean, he's a good, like I said, he's got some talent. He's been sitting in San Antonio, veteran player. He had that little bit of a run in the playoffs a couple of years ago and showed some promise. He got a big contract from the Spurs. And maybe this was just a salary dump for the Spurs, trying to get off of him to get some good players and some draft compensation. But then you also got the Celtics getting Daniel Tice for Enes Freedom, Bruno Fernando, and Dennis Schroeder. Enes Freedom is going to be waived by Houston. But to me, the Celtics team kind of looks like they took some shots for a bunch of players. They got rid of 5 players and only got back 2. And 2 players that, honestly, I don't really think move the needle. We talked about the Brooklyn Nets enough. That being said, you're going to hear about 1,000 more people talking about them in the next 24 hours and hopefully in the next 6 months when they make it to the Eastern Conference Finals to play the Heat. And I say that now because I don't have 2 people yelling at me about it. No, the Heat aren't going to make it. Jimmy Butler's overrated about Bubble Boys. I don't care. Charlotte Hornets. They trade Montrezl Harrell the Wizards trade Montrezl Harrell to the Charlotte Hornets for Vernon Carey and Ish Smith. We talked about this earlier. I talked about it with Dev. I love this trade for the Hornets. They get a guy in Montrezl Harrell who's going to provide some minutes at the 5, some backup minutes at the 4 and 5 off the bench when you got Mason Plumlee not playing. This is a guy who's going to get buckets. And there's one thing that the Charlotte Hornets need is someone for LaMelo Ball to pass the ball to in the paint that's not just going to be a screen and roll kind of guy. The Bulls decided not to move on from Patrick Williams. They decided to stay with him instead of going with the guy that a lot of people thought they could trade for in Jeremy Grant. And while Jeremy Grant is a very good player, there was concern about him going to another team and wanting to be the focus of their offense. And I don't think with Chicago, that was what they were looking for. Because in a sense, Jeremy Grant showed a lot what he could do in Denver, especially on that team with Jokic that made it to the Western Conference Finals. They were coming back 3-3, down 3-1 from a lot of just issues that a lot of other teams had. They capitalized on it. And Jeremy Grant was able to get a payday out of that. And so when he goes to another team and starts putting up buckets, he's all of a sudden thinking to himself that he is the man on a championship roster. And I like him a lot, but let's cool down, pump the brakes a little bit on this Jeremy Grant being a guy like that. He is at best your 3rd player on a championship team. And that's not a discredit to any 3rd player on a team. That's a very good thing to be. And maybe he wants to be this amazing offensive threat and just put up empty stats on teams that don't win games. If that's what he wants to do, it's his life. He's allowed to make those decisions. I'm just a guy with a microphone sitting in a room in Gainesville, Florida. So, don't listen to me, listen to him, because he's doing what he wants to do. And if that means he wants to put up a bunch of buckets on a team that doesn't do that much, that's his prerogative. Switching gears, we got the Cavaliers trading for Karis LeVert, sending out Ricky Rubio and a 1st-round pick. And to be honest, that is just the Cavs looking for an offensive threat to get them to a level in the playoffs where they can just hand the ball to somebody and give them the space. They have the defense. They just need somebody to create that's not Darius Garland because they don't have Colin Sexton at the moment. Just based off injuries. He's hurt. I don't think he's coming back for the rest of the season. So you get a guy in Karis LeVert who can do something for your team. We got the Dallas Mavericks trading Kristaps Porzingis. This is a big one. I think we touched on it a little bit. Me and Dev had a lot of things to say about this, but just to recap, we got Kristaps Porzingis and a 2nd-round pick going to the Washington Wizards for Davis Bertans and Spencer Dinwiddie. I think I've said his names, Davis Bertans, at least 16 times, and I've probably said them all different. The Mavericks get rid of their big contract in Porzingis. They get a 2nd-round pick they give rid of a 2nd-round pick, and they get back a good shooter in Davis Bertans, who's not done the best this year, especially defensively. He's always been a liability. And Spencer Dinwiddie, who's had a pretty disappointing season in Washington, a lot of leadership issues there from reports that he wasn't necessarily viewed in the locker room as the voice he thought he was. So getting him away from that team, maybe that opens things up for them. But for them, they get Kristaps Porzingis, a definite potential superstar. If he can stay healthy, Kristaps Porzingis in the past has really surprised a lot of teams with his ability to put up buckets, get some boards. He's not the best post player. even though that a lot of people want a guy who's that tall to be that good down low. He's more of a shooter. And yeah, I really think that the Wizards are just kind of taking a flyer on a guy who they're going to have to pay a lot of money. But if he can pan out to a level that is a decent enough player, you can see a couple of dudes on that team rallying around Beal and Porzingis in a way that gets them at least a little bit into more of a playoff conversation. They were the first seed in the East this year at some point, and they've regressed since then. A lot of that's due to Bradley Beal being hurt. A lot of that's just due to the regression back to the mean. So honestly, Kristaps Porzingis, at least as a flyer, is good for them. For the Wizards, and the Mavericks get back Spencer Dinwiddie, who's going to get some ball handling away from Luka Doncic to give him a little bit of rest. You got Davis Bertans, who's going to be able to catch some shots from the corner, from the top of the key, get some shots so that Luka has more people to pass to. They're also looking, the Mavericks, to sign Goran Dragic, good friends with Luka Doncic. So, hopefully for them, they get him just on a sense of he's a good backup point guard who can make some impact in the NBA today. Denver Nuggets are expected to add Indiana Pacers Jalen Smith to the roster. And if you're wondering where I'm getting all of this, you can go to the athleteshub.org. It'll be the first post on the page. Devin and me have been working on a NBA trade deadline tracker. It literally has everything. We are very thorough here. So go through that and see what you want there. The Denver Nuggets, like I said, expected to add Jalen Smith after he leaves the Indiana Pacers. And to be honest, I don't really see that mattering that much for the Nuggets. The Pistons, however, were involved in a 4-team trade that really didn't do much for anyone other than some cap flexibility and cap movement. Josh Jackson, Trey Lyles, and Devontae DiVincenzo go to the Kings. Serge Ibaka and 2 future second-round picks go to the Bucks. And the Clippers acquire Semi Ojeleye, Rodney Hood. The Pistons get Marvin Bagley III. I don't think there's really much to be said about that. A couple of 15th guys and 14th and 13th guys on a roster getting moved for one another. Just to shake things up. Golden State Warriors didn't do anything. Houston Rockets, like I said earlier, traded for Enes Freedom, who got waived, Bruno Fernando, and Dennis Schroeder. The Houston Rockets also waived DJ Augustine and Armani Brooks to make up for the roster space they did not have. For that team, I honestly see that for the Rockets as just like, hey, let's get some guys in here. Bruno Fernando, kind of, hope he does a little bit better. Dennis Schroeder, although he isn't the player that you want him to be, at least this season, he's going to bring some of that veteran ability to this team who desperately needs it. One thing to note is that the Eric Gordon did not move from the Rockets, a guy who is expected to be traded for a lot of teams this year, did not get moved. That's something to note for future free agency stuff. Moving on to the Indiana Pacers, they trade Justin Holiday, Jeremy Lamb, Domantas Sabonis, and a 2027 second-round pick to the Sacramento Kings in exchange for Tyrese Halliburton, Buddy Hield, and Tristan Thompson. Thompson is not expected to remain with the Pacers. And the Pacers they did not trade Buddy Hield before the deadline, although there were some reports that they would have. And they also trade, earlier I mentioned, they trade Karis LeVert for Ricky Rubio's expiring contract. They also trade Torrey Craig for Jalen Smith in a second. The big trade here, obviously, is the acquisition of Tyrese Halliburton and Buddy Hield. Tyrese Halliburton is a great young point guard, and although a lot of fans are kind of looking at him like, well, he only averages this much, go look at those last 15 games where he is the one dominating the ball. The ability for him to put up the points he did, put up the assist numbers he did, on the efficiency that he has at that young of an age. Yes, the jump shot looks weird. Yes, he played for the Kings, so take that into consideration. But Tyrese Halliburton is someone that NBA Nerd Twitter was loving for a long time, even before the draft. A lot of people expected him to be drafted in the top 10, and he was only picked 12th. Now, 12th is still pretty good, but you would have expected him to go a little bit higher. Problem being is that the Kings did also have a lot of guard depth already, and then they go in and add Davion Mitchell. So Tyrese Halliburton being moved, especially for Domantas Sabonis, is not only intriguing, but for the Kings, who we'll get to later, it is interesting for them as well. The Clippers trade for Robert Covington and Norman Powell in exchange for Eric Bledsoe, Keon Johnson, Justice Winslow, and a 2025 second-round pick. I love this pick for the Los Angeles Clippers. Yes, they're taking on a big contract to Norman Powell, but they bring someone that can shoot next to Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, somebody who can, on a good night, get you 20 points, shoot the rock, get some three-point shots, and space the floor for a team that right now can give him the ball, let him do his thing, so that when they get Paul George and Kawhi Leonard back, he is warm, he is ready, and they can go and contend for a title. I'm going to talk about the Lakers very, very briefly because we covered a lot about them today. They're going to monitor the buyout market. They did not make a deal at the deadline. Russell Westbrook is still on the team, and we will watch a meltdown happen in real time. It'll be fun if you want to take this journey with me. The Memphis Grizzlies, they had a great amount of chemistry with their team. They're third in the West, and they didn't do anything at the deadline, so they were confident in their team. Miami Heat, my guys, they trade KZ Okpala, rest in peace KZ season, in exchange for a 2026 second round pick. That's really a nothing trade. We get a second round pick. Good for us. It was KZ Okpala, a failed experiment. The Heat cannot sign Goran Dragic. We covered that during the podcast because of contract issues with him being on the team at the beginning of this season. The Milwaukee Bucks, as Devin mentioned it, had a little bit of a, I don't want to say disappointing free agents or disappointing trade deadline. And that's generally just because what did they get out of losing a couple of good players that they had? They lose Semi Ojeleye, they lose Rodney Hood, they lose Dante DiVincenzo, and all they get back is Serge Ibaka, who, yes, can probably give you some good minutes at the center when he's healthy, but that's the main issue, is that Serge Ibaka for the last 2 seasons has had a bit of health issues. That being said, I like the pickup of him just from the standpoint of Brook Lopez is being Brook Lopez is a little hurt, and so they might need some more depth at that position. And when you have Giannis, you can kind of get away with a little bit of depth because you're only running about an 8-9 man lineup in the playoffs, which is what I assume they figured when they got rid of 3 of their bench players for 1 more, just as a insurance. Insurance, what's the word I'm looking for? It's insurance, I guess. San Antonio Spurs reached a buyout with Goran Dragic, and yes, the Bucks are among the favorites to sign him. I do think he ends up with Dallas. Minnesota does nothing at the deadline. Moving right along, the Portland Trailblazers have traded for CJ McCollum, Larry Nance Jr., and Tony Snell. I love this trade for them just on the aspect of we get to see somebody paired with Zion who can score the ball at will with a guy like Brandon Ingram. So you got 2 dudes who, if Zion's, his injury history, if he's not feeling it for a certain game, and although he is an incredibly good player, you get basically another offensive threat to put around him so that Zion, with his injury history, doesn't have to do literally everything. And although him and Brandon Ingram didn't gel like you wanted to last season when they played, the addition of CJ McCollum will give them another guy to get them over the hump, especially with Larry Nance Jr. Yes, he's coming off of a surgery and he might not play for the rest of the year, maybe more towards the end. I love his defense. I love his rim running ability. And I think he was vastly underused and misused in Portland. I don't know if that's a coaching issue. I don't know if that's a player personnel issue or a player issue, just like not gelling with his team. But I love that pickup for the New Orleans Pelicans. The Knicks, like we talked about, we're not going to talk about them anymore. They didn't do anything. Isaiah wishes they did, but they didn't. But yeah, I'm looking down at this list. We just got a couple of more things to go. We talked about the Magic. They waived Etuan Moore, yada, yada. We talked about the 76ers. They trade for James Harden and Paul Millsap. They get rid of Ben Simmons. Finally, they get rid of Seth Curry and Andre Drummond, 2 first-round picks. Could it possibly have been overpay? We don't know. That being said, James Harden has opted into his player option for next season, so that does matter in the grand scheme of things when it comes to the long-term impact this has on the 76ers. If he doesn't sign that player option, if they don't get the guarantee that he will, do they even make this trade? Because that is such a win now move for a team that might need a year to actually gel and maybe another year to unload some of the larger contracts, i.e. Tobias Harris, in order to get some impact players in the future here. We got the Phoenix Suns trading Torrey Craig. We talked about that, or trading for Torrey Craig. We talked about that. They get Aaron Holiday as well. The Portland Trailblazers do get Josh Hart, Didi Luaza, and Tomas Satoransky. I believe those are, trying to look down in here. Yeah, Tomas Satoransky goes to the Spurs in that 3-team deal. Utah Jazz received Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Juancho Hernan-Gomez. And the Portland Trailblazers get back the expiring contract of Joe Ingles, which essentially for them is just a salary dump. We've talked about this. They also traded away they traded away Robert Covington and Norton Powell. We talked about that. The Sacramento Kings, we did a whole thing about Domantas Sabonis and Tyrese Halliburton. I love what Domantas Sabonis brings to this Kings team, who desperately need a playmaker down low in the post. I'm surprised they did not deal Rashawn Holmes this trade deadline, just on the basis of maybe getting a guy around Sabonis who can shoot a little bit more. It would have been funny if they got Miles Turner. That would have been hilarious, but that did not happen. Looking down, I believe after we've talked about all of this, I've covered pretty much everything. The Washington Wizards is probably the one that's the most surprising for people, considering that I don't believe until today people realized that he was going to be traded to the Washington Wizards. Guys, this is almost going up to 3 hours. If you've stayed around, I can't talk. If you stayed around this long, thank you. We appreciate it here. I put this together. I told the guys about 2 weeks ago that I was going to be doing this here, and it turned out really well. I'm surprised that I've gone for 2 hours and 50 minutes, and I still have stuff to talk about. But for the sake of time, my actual job, and my small but unfortunate attention span, we're going to have to go here for a little bit. Last thing I want to say, we have that trade deadline tracker on the athleteshub.org. It's got everything I just went over. If you ever need to tell somebody, hey, what happened this trade deadline? Go over there. We've got it all for you. Me and Devin have been putting that together for a couple of days now, just trying to get everything in one spot for your convenience. Check us out. We post articles all the time. We've got a couple of podcasts that we do on this network. We got the Deep Takes from 3, which features me, Devin, and Isaiah, the 2 other guys you saw today. We've got the False 9, who do a football podcast, soccer for those American folks. They do that podcast every week. We've got the Free Baseball guys, who are doing a podcast every 2 weeks talking about the unfortunate lockout for the baseball season. They had a couple of good topics the other day regarding the top 100 list. They had a whole Hall of Fame discussion about Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens not getting in. Big old plug right here. Follow me on Twitter. All of our ads are literally right down there. You can see them. They're scrolling across the screen right now. Go click on them. I don't know if you can click on them, but go search it up on Twitter. I post content all the time. I know Isaiah and Devin are very active on those spaces as well. Go follow Devin. He does a lot of the NBA prop bets. The Super Bowl's coming up. We got a lot of stuff working around that. Just go check us out on all that stuff. If you've been around here for a while, you know what we do. All right. Woo! I think that's it. Oh my gosh. Is there anything else I need to talk about? No? Any Dorian Finney-Smith and the Mavs are finalizing a 4-year contract extension. Sounds like something we could talk about in the next podcast. Go join us on Monday at 5 p.m. Check you guys out later. Peace out. I've been Gary Sunnyberger. See you later.